where does the line lie that once crossed, there's no return? How does an ordinary woman transform from a loving wife and beloved mother into a cruel murderer, capable of dividing a nation into two opposing groups? And how does her name become a constant topic among locals and newspaper headlines for years? Roxana Valdés could answer this question. Murderers don't stand out in a crowd, are not recognizable during dinner, and might even live under the same roof without revealing their true nature. They are indistinguishable from those who never cross that line. Thus, no one could have imagined what Roxana did on that spring evening of April 5th, 2014. And when they found out, they simply couldn't believe it. But let's start from the beginning. Little is known about Roxana's past. Despite the efforts of many Chilean reporters who competed to tell her story, they could find almost nothing about her. The only information from her criminal file was sparse. Born in a small village in the province of Punta Arenas, Chile, in 1957. That was it. Perhaps the lack of information was due to journalistic ethics, as the locals, known for their fiery temper and unique customs, might have retaliated against Roxana's relatives for her crime, potentially turning their lives into a living hell. Roxana Valdés was married to a man whose name, for reasons unknown, remains either undisclosed or unknown to the press. She had a son with him. It's clear that her marriage wasn't the dream every girl hopes for. As the couple eventually parted ways in 2011, as a single mother in a small village where jobs were scarce, Roxana faced significant challenges. In such communities, the primary occupation was growing and selling fruits and vegetables. Even the local educational institutions focused on agriculture. It was in this setting that Roxana found employment at the Don Gregorio boarding school, which trained students to become agricultural technicians. She worked as a night supervisor at the school, ensuring that students slept at night and did not engage in unruly activities. Her responsibilities didn't include the actual upbringing of the children. Roxana's son also attended this boarding school, as she worked in the fields during the day and couldn't give him the attention he needed. At the same boarding school where Roxana worked, Claudio Muñoz Ramirez held the position of head of grounds maintenance. His duties often required him to work during the night, which is how he came to meet Roxana. Despite being 14 years younger than her, they found much to talk about. Roxana would spend entire nights discussing school affairs and her own failed marriage with Claudio. They had common ground in their personal lives as well. Claudio had 2 daughters whom he adored, but felt disconnected from their mother, contemplating divorce several times. However, he remained in the marriage due to a promise he had made to her late father. Over time, Claudio seemingly forgot his promise and began spending his free time with Roxana, away from his family. Eventually, he made a decisive move. Without explaining himself to his wife, Claudio gathered his belongings and left their home. It was clear he went to Roxana, who happily welcomed him into her life. Their relationship progressed rapidly and effectively. Roxana let into her home a man she barely knew, with whom she had only enjoyed nighttime conversations. She seemed to overlook the fact that there were children around needing constant attention. Amidst these enjoyable and heartfelt talks, Roxana failed to notice Claudio's true nature. He was, in reality, quite temperamental, and sometimes even cruel. However, it was perhaps too early to judge who was more cruel between the two. The first serious outburst of aggression from Claudio took place within the walls of the boarding school. On a scheduled community cleanup day, students were assigned different areas to tidy up. Brooms, buckets, dustpans, and rags were distributed, everything needed for a thorough cleaning. As often happens, some students protested and refused to participate. Claudio, responsible for cleanliness but lacking any teaching experience, became infuriated with these students and threatened that, in the absence of teachers at night, he would beat anyone who didn't participate. Whether he would have followed through on this threat is unknown, but the students eventually started cleaning and later collectively complained to the principal about Claudio's threats of physical violence. The principal, displeased, asked Claudio to submit a voluntary resignation. It's important to note that the Don Gregorio boarding school was practically the only place in the area offering stable and reasonably paid employment. Claudio spent some time looking for work in fields and at fruit bases, but when it became clear his efforts were in vain, he and Roxana decided to seek a better life elsewhere, leaving her son in the boarding school to continue his education. They deemed it too risky to embark on this venture with him. To avoid dependency on employers, having been burned once already, the couple decided to start their own small business, a fruit kiosk. They moved to a favorable location, the commune of Molina, a couple of hours' drive from the Chilean capital. This place is well known for its vineyards, producing renowned wine brands exported worldwide. Roxana and Claudio purchased a kiosk near their new home, found suppliers for vegetables and fruits, and made their first steps in their small family business. Claudio handled the purchasing and transportation of the products from suppliers to the kiosk, while Roxana was in charge of sales throughout the day. Hiring an employee wasn't feasible, as it would mean additional expenses. Moreover, they feared that an employee might not monitor the perishable goods closely enough, leading to further losses. Claudio was visibly upset and even angry when he found out that Roxana was expecting their first child together. Perhaps it was a moment that required serious reflection, but Roxana, perhaps blinded by her new relationship and their flourishing business, didn't oppose her husband's view. She agreed that once the child was born, they would soon hand it over to her relatives for upbringing. However, it turned out there was no child to give away. Since that time, Claudio's behavior changed drastically. He often yelled at his wife and sometimes even resorted to physical violence. Neighbors from nearby houses, unhappy with their noisy new neighbors, witnessed this behavior many times and often called the Chilean police, the carabineros, to intervene and calm the domestic disputes. On one occasion, when the carabineros arrived in response to a call, they witnessed Roxana, in tears and almost half-naked, running out of the house, followed by Claudio. Roxana confessed to the officers that she was a victim of systematic domestic violence, which had led to a miscarriage. She even required psychological help after the incident. However, as time passed, the grievances were forgotten, and the troubled couple, as if nothing had happened, continued to live together as before. Following the incident, Claudio should have faced criminal charges, but a compassionate Roxana decided to give him another chance, extracting a promise that it was a one-time occurrence. Claudio vowed never to repeat such behavior, but his past actions with his ex-wife suggested his words might not hold much weight. Unfortunately, history repeated itself. Claudio temporarily ceased his physical abuse of Roxana but developed a habit of leaving home at night to drink heavily in local bars. He spent considerable amounts of their family budget not only on alcohol, but also on local women of ill repute. Roxana endured her husband's behavior, believing that Claudio would settle down once they had a child together. In a sense, she was right. In 2013, Roxana gave birth to a healthy child. Claudio stopped his carousing and fully immersed himself in their business, which now needed to expand. They purchased another kiosk in a neighboring area and another vehicle for product transportation. Roxana also invested in firearms for protection as they lived and worked in less safe areas. The family's wealth increased significantly, but only on paper. Claudio reverted to his old ways, squandering money on drinking and again resorting to domestic violence against Roxana. In Roxana's testimony, she recounted the escalating abuse in her relationship with Claudio. Initially, Claudio's drinking was infrequent, but it soon increased in frequency. He would come home inebriated, accusing Roxana of imagined infidelities, leading to physical and sexual abuse. Despite her pregnancy, Claudio's actions seemed deliberately harmful, culminating in a miscarriage in August 2012 that plunged Roxana into a lengthy depression. One night, following his usual pattern, Claudio went out to a local bar and did not return home until the next morning. Roxana, used to his behavior, still worried about him. It turned out that Claudio had stolen 5 million Chilean pesos, about $6,000, which Roxana had from selling her mother's house to spend on alcohol and brothels. This betrayal shocked Roxana, as the money was for their shared business and was hidden in their daughter's room. When Claudio finally returned home late that evening, Roxana confronted him about the missing money. Uninterested in discussing, Claudio hit her and admitted to squandering all the money. This was the last straw for Roxana. Without a word, she went to their bedroom, retrieved a revolver intended for protection against local criminals, and shot Claudio in the chest. He died instantly, surprised by her drastic action. Roxana, equally shocked by her own actions, attempted to stem the bleeding from the fatal gunshot wound, but it was too late. The close-range shot from a .38 caliber bullet was fatal. Roxana's desperate act marked a tragic culmination of ongoing domestic turmoil. Roxana's testimony reveals her profound remorse and recognition of the immorality of her actions. She confesses that when she went for the revolver, her intention was not to intimidate Claudio but to kill him. She recalls the countless times Claudio abused and assaulted her, and her failure to report him to the authorities or retract her complaint out of fear. She feared being alone even before they had a child together. After shooting Claudio, Roxana's immediate concern was the potential impact on their daughter, especially if Roxana were imprisoned and the child sent to an institution. That night, Roxana decided that the best way to deal with the situation was to dispose of the body and report Claudio missing, aware that his frequent disappearances during drinking binges were known to the police. Disposing of the body was a daunting task for Roxana, a delicate woman. She decided to remove it piece by piece. First, she used kitchen knives intended for meat cutting to sever the limbs and head. This process required 5 knives, as they kept dulling. Then she boiled the dismembered parts in the largest pots she had, all while playing with her young daughter, who was oblivious to her mother's actions and her father's fate. Roxana's calculated approach to disposing of the body while maintaining a semblance of normalcy for her daughter highlights the complexity and desperation of her situation. The day after cooking and cooling the body parts, Roxana packed them into plastic containers, organizing them separately: hands, legs, head, and torso. Each container was then placed in a garbage bag. She loaded them into her car and headed to St. Lucia to scatter the bags on a vacant lot. Before leaving, she thoroughly cleaned her house with bleach. However, once in St. Lucia, she couldn't muster the courage to dispose of the bags from her car, despite finding a suitable spot. In her testimony, Roxana expressed her internal conflict. "It's strange. I had the bravery to commit this heinous crime and dismember a human body as if it were a piglet, but I couldn't bring myself to dispose of the evidence. I was nervous throughout the drive, feeling constantly watched, fearing that police would stop and search my car at any turn. This fear led to panic, even though I had a backup plan involving my daughter, pretending to rush her to the hospital if stopped. I even thought of how to pinch her to make her cry louder." Unable to discard the remains, Roxana returned home with them, hiding the bags in the garage. She cleaned her car's interior with bleach again and visited Claudio's relatives, claiming that he had stolen a large sum of money and hadn't been home for days. They merely shrugged in response. She then visited her mother and brother. Her mother was extremely worried about Roxana's behavior. She was not eating, had a glassy-eyed look, and repeatedly asked the same questions. The only question she answered promptly was about Claudio's absence, saying he went to buy goods for their store, but had a flat tire and got delayed. Returning home and alone with her thoughts and the hidden evidence, Roxana broke down. She called her brother for help. When he arrived, she confessed everything and showed him the containers. Naturally, her brother was in shock. When Roxana called her brother, she wanted to vent and share the nightmarish years she endured with Claudio, but above all, she needed his help to get rid of the containers holding the body. However, her brother refused, fearing police involvement and the possibility of being charged as an accomplice. He urged her to confess to the Carabineros, Chilean police, insisting he would do it if she didn't. Disappointed but realizing she had no other choice, Roxana complied. That night, Roxana went to the 4th police station and announced her intention to make an important statement. The officers, familiar with her, initially thought she wanted to report her troublesome husband. However, they were shocked by her confession. Roxana was immediately arrested. The news spread rapidly throughout the area, attracting countless journalists around the station. They waited eagerly to photograph Roxana as she was let out, hoping to capture a few images and, if lucky, ask her and the officers some questions. As the journalists waited, Roxana was eventually brought out. Handcuffed and in distress, she exclaimed, "I was afraid he would kill me one day," before being escorted into a police car. The case seemed straightforward. Roxana had confessed, provided evidence, and voluntarily surrendered. However, prosecutor Monica Ballesteros wanted a deeper investigation. Skeptical of Roxana's easy confession, she requested an extended arrest to conduct a forensic examination. Ballesteros aimed to prove that Claudio was still alive during the dismemberment, which would significantly increase Roxana's sentence. The judge granted a 60-day detention for further investigation. Meanwhile, Roxana's attorney, Jerónimo Gutiérrez, argued that Roxana acted under extreme emotional distress, possibly exacerbated by postpartum depression and chronic domestic abuse. She emphasized Roxana's cooperation and voluntary confession as mitigating factors. However, the prosecution's theory that Claudio was alive during dismemberment crumbled after forensic results. It was confirmed that Claudio died from the gunshot wound to the chest. The bullet from the .38 caliber revolver caused a heart rupture and damaged vital organs, disproving the prosecution's initial hypothesis. Given these developments, the aggravating circumstances were dismissed. Another lawyer, Juan Pablo Cardenas, who sought to make a name for himself in this high-profile case, pointed out that the firearm used in the murder was legally registered. He also noted that Roxana's first report of domestic violence to the police was filed just 20 days after the couple started living together. Psychologist Rodrigo Valenzuela, after a medical examination, submitted documents to the court indicating that Roxana was extremely mentally unstable at the time of the crime. This meant she wasn't fully aware of her actions, and her emotional instability was linked to the loss of 2 children, one in August 2012 and another just 3 weeks before the crime. Furthermore, a forensic examination requested by the prosecutor revealed that Claudio had a high blood alcohol level of 3 grams per liter at the time of his death. On April 17, 2015, after a year of various examinations, investigations, and evidence gathering, Roxana's trial began. The media, often sensationalizing tragedies, dubbed the case the Molina Cook's case, alluding to Roxana's dismemberment and boiling of her former husband. Some unscrupulous journalists seeking to attract attention to their publications even fabricated stories that Roxana had eaten part of the remains, although this was merely a product of their imagination. Roxana, aware of the media portrayal and deeply distressed by it, refused to make any statements during the trial. The prosecutors tried to influence the judge by emphasizing that Roxana committed a grave crime by Chilean standards, patricide. However, they couldn't prove that the murder was premeditated. The defense attorney, in turn, argued that his client acted in self-defense, protecting herself from a brute who had brutally mistreated her for years. The court hearing lasted several weeks, and during this time, the entire population of Chile followed the case closely. Prosecutor Monica requested a 15-year prison sentence for the accused. However, the judges, having carefully listened to the defense and the jury's opinion, sentenced Roxana to 6 years in a correctional facility with a lenient regime. Claudio's relatives, who understandably wished for a life sentence or even execution for Roxana, and were already protesting when they heard the prosecutor asking for only 15 years, were utterly dismayed by the actual court decision. They tried to deny any violence in the family and argued that Claudio, being a businessman and financially independent, could not have stolen $6,000 from Roxana. They also claimed that Claudio had confessed to them that Roxana often took out the revolver from the closet and told her husband that she would kill him one day. Claudio's sister, in an interview with the press, even tried to blame Chile as a state, arguing that it's a country where there is no justice, and the judicial system is utterly corrupt, given that such brutal criminals are given such short sentences, comparable to minor robberies. Even Giselle, Claudio's first wife, defended her ex-husband, assuring everyone that there couldn't have been any violence from Claudio's side. She had lived with him for many years, and during all that time, he never dared to lay a finger on her. Meanwhile, Roxana often caused disputes, motivated by her jealousy and possessiveness. Regarding Roxana's subsequent imprisonment, she spent only 2/3 of her sentence in the colony before being transferred to a semi-open education center in Talca for good behavior. Roxana was allowed to communicate with her daughter and was eventually released early. The press, of course, stirred up public interest in this case again, and the public was extremely outraged that the cook from Molina was released early. However, there were also those who, although considering Roxana a murderer, still justified her actions, seeing her as a victim in the whole situation. The debate over this case continues in the country to this day. Overall, this story highlights the grave consequences that can result if domestic violence is not addressed at early stages. Wedding travel, or as it is also called, honeymoon, an event is definitely important in the life of a young family. It can be a bright impressions received from an unforgettable adventure, or for example, a long-awaited vacation from boring life, somewhere on the Azure coast under the shade of palm trees. But what about when you go on your wedding trip only to commit a real crime, or not to commit it, but only to be accused of it? Would the honeymoon be as bright and carefree in such a case? I don't think so. Unforgettable, of course. Isabella Rodriguez, hereafter Hellman, was born in 1975 in Colombia. It is a country where everyone speaks only Spanish, but Isabella literally dreamed the American dream. She bought books in English, listened to songs on the radio, and all just to learn the language and as soon as possible to leave to conquer the northern part of the continent. However, the language to learn Isabella succeeded, but the southern accent remained with her forever. But this did not prevent the young woman to move to Florida, get a job there as a real estate agent, and help in renting or buying homes like her people who speak only Spanish. In 2002, Isabella, although not to say that she was lucky, but still married William Hellman. And despite the fact that the couple lived in marriage for 10 years, their entire union, a series of continuous quarrels and domestic disputes. Finally, when the patience of the spouses finally burst, they filed for divorce. The divorce process lasted a very long time, as long as 2 years. During these 2 years, Isabella even managed to find a new man, with whom, as it seemed to her, she will certainly find happiness. The new lover's name was Lewis Bennett, and he was from Great Britain. As a child, his family moved to live in Australia, thanks to which Lewis received dual citizenship and was able to return to his native country and graduate their quite prestigious Canborne School of Mines. But Lewis never managed to work in his specialty. It is impossible to say whether this is good or bad, because just a couple of years after graduating in the UK, he returned to Australia and opened his own solar panel manufacturing company. And it is worth noting that it was quite successful, because just 4 years later, he was able to enter the American market. And in view of the fact that his main office was in Florida, the young and promising Lewis began to look for a wife there via the internet. It would seem that today, it is easy to get acquainted with someone on the internet, and much easier than to do it in person. But Lewis had no luck with this for a long time. He flipped through the profiles of women, not even paying much attention to them. Those who wrote to him first either scared him off or did not arouse his interest. But when he saw Isabella in the photo, she seemed to him a copy of Jennifer Lopez, and he decided to write to her. It should be noted that they corresponded for quite a long time and very often. Isabella told him about how she always wanted to move to America from Colombia, how long she had been learning the language, how she was looking for a job, and finally, she even confided in him and told him about her past relationships. Bennett was not at all embarrassed by this, especially since Isabella and William's divorce is only a matter of time. As for the young woman herself, she was apparently tired of past relationships and the long divorce, which ate up all the inner strength. She herself took the initiative to meet in person and began to come to Lewis wherever he was, whether it was England, Australia, or even Thailand. And Lewis, trying to strike his new lover, bought a catamaran on which he planned to travel the Caribbean Sea with Isabella. It was his childhood dream, because of frequent moves, quickly find new friends could not manage and had to spend his free time reading adventure books such as Jules Verne or Louis Stevenson. Yes, Bennett has noted that Treasure Island was his favorite book, perhaps for good reason, and it would still play a role in his life. Isabella spent all her free time, whether it was vacation or a long weekend, traveling with Lewis, and she noticed that during these expensive trips, Bennett practically forgot about work. Yes, of course, it could be reduced to the fact that all the processes in his company were so automated that he could live for himself. But nevertheless, Isabella was alarmed. She even once tried to talk to her lover on this topic, but the man either joked away or in full earnest said that he got a huge inheritance and nothing to worry about. Isabella was satisfied with such an answer. In July 2016, the couple had a joyful event. They had a daughter. For Lewis, as well as for Isabella, it was the first child. the girl they named Amelia, and here the young parents began the first disagreements, which Isabella, because of the past sad experience, experienced extremely hard. They could not decide how right they should bring up their daughter. Then, in what country the daughter would be better to grow up. Louis insisted with all his might that Amelia grew up in Australia, next to his parents, and Isabella, on the contrary, did not want to go anywhere from America. Finally, the young father gave in, and in 2017, the whole family moved to Florida, where they, despite the already born daughter, decided to finally get married. Isabella begged her, now husband, to go on a honeymoon, as she hoped that this sea voyage would bring them back to the state when they first got to know each other and carefree sailing around the islands on the high seas on his catamaran. Louis heard his wife's whims and promised her that there would definitely be a honeymoon, but a little later. And Louis wasn't lying. In late April 2017, he returned from Australia and the couple headed out on their romantic cruise. Yes, at first, judging by the posts on social media, everything was indeed as Isabella wanted. In all the photos, they are smiling, clasping each other in their arms and traveling around the Caribbean islands. However then, after those endless honeymoon photos, a lull began. A long one, for 2 weeks. When Isabella reappeared online, she told her family that she and her husband were in Cuba and were planning to return to Florida, but didn't know which way yet. She also added that they have a very bad connection here, so in the next few days, they may not expect a call from her. On the night of May 15th, the Coast Guard received a call for help from Louis. He said he was alone on a raft in the open sea. Rescuers immediately went in search of him. The man was found near the Bahamas, and he was indeed alone on a boat that was filled to the top with various things and provisions. On the shore, Louis told the following story. On May 14th, after a tiring day, he asked Isabella to give him a few hours of rest, and entrusting his wife with the management of the catamaran, went to take a nap in the cabin. Louis was awakened by a heavy thump from below, and he called out to his wife, but she did not respond. Then he went upstairs, looked around, and realized that Isabella was nowhere on board, and the very blow that had awakened him had created a hole in the bottom of the catamaran, through which water began to enter his vessel, and the boat began to sink. Louis decided that his wife was simply carried overboard by the blow, and since she was wearing a vest, she was fine, and in order not to go to the bottom with his child, he gathered all his belongings and moved to the rescue boat. Meanwhile, the rescuers, having taken a look at the contents of Louis's life raft, were surprised, as the man took only those things that belonged to him, as if he had no hope that his beloved Isabella was alive and would soon be found. He even brought his tea set with him. Also in his backpack were found aluminum tubes, inside which were hidden silver coins, but this discovery was not paid attention to because it was necessary to move urgently to search for Isabella. The Coast Guard used absolutely all the equipment they had, including helicopters, and surveyed the entire area, but all to no avail. But they found the very catamaran, which, according to Louis's statements, crashed on underwater rocks, but there were no underwater rocks or reefs in the vicinity. Nor had the boat itself gone completely to the bottom. It was decided to inspect the boat. For this purpose, several divers were sent to it. Again, the results of their examination did not coincide with Louis's story. As I said earlier, there were no underwater rocks at the wreck site. The boat simply could not have collided with anything, and the holes that were on the bottom were made from inside the boat, not outside. Another literally shocking oddity in this case was that the boat had all the escape hatches open, which of course increased the rate of sinking of the catamaran, and Louis mentioned in his story that he left the boat over the side, as he was supposed to. The fact is that escape hatches are strictly forbidden to be opened, and they are needed only when there is no other way to leave the sinking vessel. Also, Louis, being an experienced seafarer, did not use a beacon or satellite phone, which would have helped rescuers to find travelers in time in case of disaster. That is, from the outside, it looked as if Louis deliberately sank the ship and made it look like an accident. But then, where is his wife? On May 17th, the search for Isabella continued, although 120 hours had passed since the catamaran wreck, while the possibility of finding a woman alive in the middle of the open sea is only 13 hours. On May 18th, the search stopped. Isabella has not been found to this day. Lewis himself returned home on May 15th, as if he wasn't really worried about missing Isabella, and what's more, he bought just one ticket to Australia for May 19th, so he didn't even hope that the rescue team would be able to find his wife, dead or alive. But he tried his best to get his wife's death certificate as soon as possible so that he could get the insurance he was entitled to as a close relative. This was denied. After the insurance company refused, Lewis visited Isabella's parents and tried to take his daughter away from them. They blamed him for Isabella's death and did not want to give Amelia away. He was able to take his daughter only after calling the police. On May 28th, he left Amelia with his parents in the UK and returned to Florida to try again to get the insurance payment, which by law was entitled to him. To the police, Lewis's behavior seemed extremely suspicious. They were literally sure that he was to blame for his wife's disappearance, but they had no evidence. Even the catamaran on which the murder could theoretically have taken place, and on which it was possible to find evidence confirming it, had gone to the bottom, to a great depth, and it was impossible to get it out of there. But the search of the house where Lewis and Isabella lived, as well as Lewis's own cell phone, proved fruitful. Yes, the fact that the husband and wife could not communicate with each other for weeks, and the husband himself could periodically disappear from home and not appear there for a long time, is not considered any evidence. But the fact that in the house were found recording devices on which Isabella recorded constant threats of her husband already pushed the investigation to the idea that not everything in their relationship was smooth. Because judging by these records, Lewis repeatedly promised to kill his wife. Isabella even told her friends about it and shared with them that she wanted to leave her fierce husband and cruel tyrant, but only try one more time, now the last, to save their relationship. But as we already know, she never succeeded. The main reason for quarrels were debts Lewis: real estate, electricity, credit cards. He literally drowned in debt, and get out of this pit it seemed impossible. Moreover, he did not try to solve his problems, but only continued to travel on his catamaran, still did not work anywhere, and in addition spent some of the rest of his savings on such things as Thai boxing lessons in Thailand. Of course, Isabella didn't like it, and in the meantime, Lewis even forced his wife to give up child rearing and get a job so that she could pay off his debts while he was doing more important things. Looking into Lewis Bennett's debts, the investigation also found that between 2014 and 2016, the man engaged in international transfers totaling about $160,000. As it turned out, the very coins that rescuers found in Lewis's backpack were very rare and collectible. Later, the investigation will establish that the coins were stolen in 2016. One of Lewis's acquaintances, who at that time was a member of the crew of the ship Kitty, and when the crew went to town, this acquaintance stole the coins and gave them to Lewis for further resale. Yes, it was for smuggling that the investigation managed to put Lewis behind bars, because during a search of the house, in addition to those tape recordings, the police found some of the coins. For smuggling, Lewis received 7 months in prison. There, while behind bars, the man also received a second charge, just for the involuntary manslaughter of his wife. The investigation carefully checked all the facts that they had on their hands, in which they so scrupulously collected piece by piece, and came to the conclusion that during their trip, Isabella found in her husband's things those very collectible coins, and between them there was a scandal. But it was not entirely clear whether Isabella had been killed on the boat or in the water. During the quarrel, quite fiery and somewhere even cruel husband could either not calculate the force of the blow or throw the woman into the water and then do not provide her with any help. And so Isabella drowned while her husband watched her torment, being on board. During the tragedy, Lewis realized that his wife's death was a good thing for him, and if he made it look like a sinking boat accident, he would get an additional payout for the sinking catamaran in addition to the money for Isabella's death, since it was also considered an insured event. But only the whole story on the part of the prosecution was just a fantasy of the grief-stricken relatives. Lewis was never charged with premeditated murder. For lack of evidence, he was offered a deal that if he pleaded guilty, he would only get 8 years. Lewis accepted. But should he have agreed to it, if he really is not guilty, and all the evidence against him is only a tape recorder where he threatens his wife? Isabella's relatives were of course furious at this verdict, but also realized that otherwise Louis Bennett would serve the rest of his time for the smuggling article and be released very soon. In November 2018, Louis Bennett received 8 years in prison, and all of the insurance payments and all of his wife's assets, which he had claimed, and for which he had arranged all of this, will go to Amelia. Also, the court ordered Louis to pay monetary compensation to his daughter, who has yet to experience such serious psychological trauma as she grows up. The mysterious disappearance of Maya Millette. In January 2021, the city of Chula Vista, California, had not been quiet for days on end. During lunch, office workers shared city news with each other, and by late afternoon they consolidated what they'd heard over a family dinner. "Did you hear that?" they said. "A young woman, a mother of 3, has mysteriously disappeared." And each of them voiced their own versions of what had happened, but none of them wanted to be in her shoes personally. 40-year-old Maya Millette, a Filipino-American woman, disappeared from her own home on January 7, 2021. Outdoor surveillance cameras recorded Maya returning home around 5 p.m. The woman was not seen after that. The relatives of the missing woman, who were knocked down, stunned with grief, handed out leaflets with Maya's photos and hung posters around the city. Their concern was understandable. January 10th was the birthday of my eldest daughter. She would never for anything in the world would not miss this holiday, they said in one voice. As reported by the woman's relatives, the last time she got in touch with them was January 7th at 8:15 p.m. Dozens of volunteers and police officers went in search of Maya Millette. They searched the wooded area, nearby neighborhoods, creeks, and an abandoned golf course, but were unable to find anything. Larry Millette himself, the husband of the missing woman, never took part in the search for his wife. Moreover, after some time, he cut off all contact with her relatives. For a long time, the police assumed that Maya, having quarreled with her husband once again, decided to leave him. However, when she left the house, she could have been caught on the neighbor's CCTV camera, so she either did not leave the house, climbed out the window, or left the house in another way. What could be the reason for such strange behavior of a man? Maya, standing out among the others with her unusual beauty, probably had a lot of admirers, and maybe even more than one affair on the side. It is quite possible, without informing anyone, having lost her former feelings for her husband, she ran away from him, and not alone. Maybe that's why he was angry and didn't take action. Larry claimed, "I thought she was still alive because she voluntarily left our home at least twice in 2020 without saying goodbye to me, or our 3 children. We prayed for her safety and well-being. God gave Pablito and Noema Tabalanza 6 children. Maya was born as the 5th, since it was in May that the girl was born. Her parents gave her the name May. She succeeded everywhere. The purposeful character of the girl helped her in this. Thus, being in elementary school, she was in the top 5 students of her class. After the immigration of the family in March 1995 in the city of Honolulu, located in Hawaii, the girl entered the high school Retford, and there she began to show herself. She actively participated in various school and extracurricular activities, especially emphasizing the drama club and dance lessons. After graduating from high school with honors at the age of 17, Maya got a job at McDonald's, where she met her future husband, Larry Millette. A relationship developed between them. When Maya turned 19 years old, they got married. At the same time, the girl entered the University of Hawaii at Manoa, a land-grant state research university. Life was boiling for the young people. While Maya was studying at the university, her husband Larry was training in the Navy in Virginia. After a while, the couple decided to move to the city of Chula Vista, California. In order not to stop studying, Maya continued her studies at the University of San Diego. After graduating with honors, she took a job with the U.S. Navy as a civilian contract specialist. Where are those strange noises coming from? Maya thought. Am I going crazy already, and are they unreal? The phrases, "I love you," "love me," echoed through the house, slightly audible. Day and night they kept the young woman awake, haunting her in different places in the house. Maya's family didn't stop looking. They immediately hired a private detective. To maximize the attention of those who cared, the family repeatedly appealed to the public to help them in their search for her. On February 5, 2021, the Chula Vista Police Department and the Millet family held a briefing to encourage as many people as possible to look for her. A short time later, skeletal remains were discovered in Orange County that were believed to be Maya Millet's, but this turned out not to be the case. It was then claimed that the remains belonged to a man. It was later proven that the remains were animal bones after all. On April 6, 2021, Maya's disappearance was broadcast on Good Morning America. The missing person case gained national interest in April 2021 when Maya's sister appeared on Dr. Phil's talk show to talk about the situation. Maya took all matters particularly seriously. Despite the fact that she came from a large family and loved children very much, she was in no hurry to have them. She didn't want to give birth until she and Larry had a steady, stable, high income. That's the American dream. After all, they had to provide their children with the best future imaginable. To make it happen, they had to work very hard and diligently. The right moment came in 2010. Then Maya and Larry had a daughter, Lara. In the wake of her a year later, another daughter, Milani, was born, and in 2016, the heir son, Lazarus Tristan. Maya was a great mother. She devoted all her free time to her children, giving all of herself. She attended all their school events, traveled with them in her SUV. There are some women whose children become the center of their universe. Wise, indulgent, caring. Maya was one of those women. By the end of 2020, the couple's relationship had become strained. Larry assumed that Maya had a lover. Her husband's jealousy knew no bounds, and if before she put up with these attacks, now she could barely tolerate it. Later, the DA's office would report that Maya had warned of Larry's capacity for anger. Just 2 days before his disappearance, police said, Maya texted a friend to end the marriage. "I told him I'm filing for divorce whether he likes it or not," she claimed. "I'm no longer trying to make peace for the sake of the kids." Larry controlled literally every move his wife made. At a frantic pace, the jealousy was escalating into sheer paranoia. Larry could go to her workplace at any time to make sure that Maya was not alone with another man. Larry was also pissed off by the fact that there were plenty of men on his wife's team. Larry once had the audacity to send an email to Maya's former boss, Derek Sopp, requesting that a male colleague be transferred to another division. He followed her practically around the clock, even got the kids involved in their squabbles. Larry once hid a child's cell phone in his spouse's car to track her movements. It got to the point where Larry was getting violent. He almost strangled Maya once. The couple separated, but not for long. In early 2020, Maya moved in with her brother, but rekindled her relationship with Larry after about 6 weeks. On August 12, 2020, Maya texted her brother JR, "He never lets me be alone. He checks all my emails, messages, messengers, Facebook posts. He even checks my app on Venmo. And then what happens? He just tightens the reins harder." Although Larry wasn't initially a suspect, police have taken a keen interest in his identity. Investigators contacted Maya's relatives, who said that shortly before the disappearance, the couple had gone camping and spent the entire time they were there fighting. Maya returned from the camping trip and told her family that if anything happened to her, Larry would be involved. According to the case file, Maya's friend told police that Maya made a different statement in December 2020. "I don't think he would hurt me, but I think he would hurt the kids to get back at me." Prosecutors say the mother of 3 did not explain further what she meant at the time. When we fall in love, for better or worse, we see the object of our adoration exclusively in a rosy light. Often we project our character traits and attitude to life onto our partner without noticing the red flags, so-called in psychology behavior, that may indicate the presence of an underlying problem or a potential threat to the well-being of the partner relationship. Abusers, manipulators, narcissists, aggressors. We justify them with deficiencies of upbringing, stress, but we should look deeper. Apparently, the nature is so laid down that families were created mostly in youth, when the whole world is presented in rose-colored glasses, so to speak, for a great, sometimes blind love, so that the human race did not stop. And after a while, having gained the necessary life experience, We see in a partner what was so carefully hidden from us at first glance. We think about re-educating, smoothing out all the sharp edges, to reconcile finally. But no, you can't change a grown man. It remains only not to give an outlet for his negative traits. This is the case with jealousy. If a person has certain traumatic events, paranoia is not far away. Returning to the sounds that Maya heard, one might guess that the woman had developed hallucinations amidst the stress of her family's troubles, but that was not the case. The situation took an unexpected turn. Maya remained sane, which is not the case with Larry. A police detective named Lorenzo Ruiz told the public the story of Larry's internet search, releasing screenshots of queries that included subconscious wife training and subconsciously training your wife to give pleasure. Unable to reach an amicable agreement, Larry began to influence Maya's subconscious mind by installing certain devices around the house that made this sound. Larry's cunning ruse was discovered by Maya. According to Matthew Grinley, an investigator with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, in late 2020, Maya sent messages to Larry demanding that he stop playing such audio messages that negatively affect a person's mental health. This is a kind of influence that programs a person to perform certain actions. Maya heard these sounds every day. Maya's sister-in-law named Genesis Tabalamza later told investigators that Larry himself had independently recorded all these words and even confessed to Genesis about it. Who could have inspired Larry to do such a thing? Maybe the specifics of the job and the training he received during his service gave him the idea? The answer will shock many. The investigation found that between September 2020 and the time of Maya's disappearance, Larry sent more than 1,000 messages to various spellcasters and psychics. He purchased about 70 spell charms from them, spending more than $1,000. During a search of the home, police officers found a book titled Magical Love Spells. Larry was sending messages to similar witches and warlocks one time a day for sure. He asked for a spell to make Maya suffer some kind of physical injury that would make her unable to move around on her own, maybe become disabled, in general, to be completely dependent on her husband. Larry thought that seeing his concern at such a time, and the fact that he had not abandoned her in her hour of need, Maya would appreciate his feelings for her. After all, he is such a good man. Here's what he wrote in his messages. I would like a strong spell to bind my wife Maya Millett to me forever, to make her love me unconditionally as I love her. I hope you are able to cast a spell to cause bodily harm or maim, but not to kill. Looking at everything that was happening, at how Larry was gradually losing his mind, Maya was finally convinced of her intentions. In December 2020, Maya decided to divorce her husband. Every event in life, like actions, has an initial mechanism, a so-called trigger. Police believe that Larry's desperation to lose his beloved continued to grow by the day. On January 7th, the day authorities believe Maya contacted a divorce attorney, he was frantically trying to overturn my spouse's decision to file for divorce. I'm shaking inside, ready to snap, he wrote to one of the spellers. Earlier in the day, Maya called a divorce lawyer. By the way, attorneys also reported that Maya strategized how she would serve Larry with divorce papers because she was concerned about his reaction. She considered going somewhere else, and then suing him, and even made a contingency plan to stay in a friend's vacant apartment. But Maya didn't want to leave her children behind, prosecutors reported. She did not want the children to be with the defendant when he found out she was seeking a divorce. Perhaps Larry's extreme behavior, triggered by jealousy of his spouse, can also be blamed on mental health issues the man had, but had been dormant for a long time. Or maybe he always behaved differently than other people, just Maya and Larry did not put out of the trash. Larry's behavior was becoming more and more like that of a psychopath. Larry has a truly horrible temper, Maya wrote in a text message in June, according to the case file. In his own home, he created a small altar in the center of which he placed a joint photo with his spouse. Larry smeared the photo with his own blood and placed 4 candles around the edges. On January 23rd, police officers obtained a search warrant for the Millett family home. They found 16 firearms in the home that belonged to Larry. It was determined that 2 of the guns were in his possession illegally. 4 of the guns for which Larry had a license were missing. When asked by police officers where the weapons had disappeared to, the man explained that he had loaned them to his friend and uncle. In May 2021, Larry received a restraining order for the weapons, after which he had to surrender them to the authorities. This was justified by the fact that police found pictures of Larry's young son surrounded by guns in the house. It was possible that the children had access to it, so fearing for the possibility of them hurting themselves, the court ordered the order. The day after Maya's disappearance, at approximately 6:45 a.m., a neighbor's surveillance camera captured the Millet family's black SUV, a Lexus GX 460, driven by Larry. The man returned home at approximately 6 p.m. Where he had been all this time is not known. Another suspicious moment. The car was originally parked in such a way that the back of it was not in view of the neighbor's security cameras. As we remember from the beginning of this story, Maya's family was planning a birthday party for her oldest daughter on January 10th, 2021. So when Maya stopped answering calls and texts, one of her siblings traveled to Chula Vista to make sure everything was okay. When Maya's brother met with Larry, the latter told him that his wife had gone to one of her rooms the night before after their argument, locked herself in it, and was not talking to anyone. In the morning, Larry took his son to Solana Beach, a coastal town in San Diego County, and when he returned, Maya was still in the locked bedroom on the second floor. On January 9th, Larry again told Maya's relatives the same story about the locked room, but no one believed him. The relatives demanded that Larry grant them access. When Maya's family entered the room, it was empty. Maya was nowhere to be found in the house. However, her car was parked outside the house. Only her credit card and driver's license were missing. After that, around midnight, Maya's older sister, Chris, filed a missing persons report with the police. It wasn't until January 15th, after his spouse missed his oldest daughter's 11th birthday, that Larry Millet said he was concerned about his wife's fate. In addition, on January 8th, the day after Maya disappeared, Larry did not text any of the psychics. And on January 9th, according to prosecutors, he asked a witch to lift all spells on Maya and cast spells on a man he believed Maya was having an affair with. It is clear that Maya was unlikely to have left her house, otherwise the security camera would have recorded it. On that unfortunate day, another strange thing happened. Larry and Maya's children were playing in the yard at about 10 p.m. This event did not go unnoticed by a neighbor of the Millet family. He was surprised by it, since it was late and cold outside. At 9:57 p.m., the neighbor's surveillance camera captured the sound of 9 loud bangs. Police speculated that they may well have been gunshots. After audio analysis of the video, police were unable to understand the nature of the sounds. Another coincidence that casts doubt on the man. Larry owned a huge gun collection, including a .40 caliber Smith Wesson pistol, which police were unable to locate in the house, according to court documents. Billy Little, a junior attorney working with Maya's family to investigate the case, was able to uncover one incident that occurred 15 years ago, specifically on the evening of April 30th, 1997, in San Diego's Bay Terrace neighborhood. Maya met Larry Millet in high school after he moved to Hawaii from San Diego with his family. The move may have been prompted by Larry's arrest for a 1997 juvenile gang-related assault. I have reason to believe that he, Larry, was in a gang, the attorney argued. As a juvenile, Larry was arrested for a stabbing. The victim of the attack suffered multiple stab wounds and was rushed to Mercy Hospital, where he eventually recovered. As a rule, criminal records often find their echoes in adulthood. In an interview in January 2021, Larry admitted that he did have an argument with Maya in 2020. As of February 3, 2021, Larry stopped cooperating with the police. On July 22nd, Larry was officially named a suspect. Investigators assumed that the 41-year-old man killed his wife on the night of January 7th, ate, and then disposed of her body. In interviews, Larry told the same story that Maya's relatives had heard, about the argument in the room his wife had locked herself in. By a strange coincidence, his phone was turned off for about 11 hours on January 8th. Larry didn't show up for work that same day, and no one reliably knew exactly what he was doing. It was impossible to track his whereabouts. Too bad the neighbor's video surveillance camera is a mute witness to the events that unfolded and can't talk. The camera shows Larry driving his car up to the garage in such a way that the rear of the car is not in the frame. Larry may well have known which part the camera was capturing and positioned the car in a convenient manner. During this time, he could safely carry Maya's body through the garage and then, loading it into the trunk, drive away to dispose of it. Following his arrest, the man remained in custody and was held without bail. On October 19, 2021, Larry Millett was arrested for the murder of his wife Maya based on circumstantial evidence, and the children were given legal custody to his parents. To prevent further emotional trauma, the court barred Larry from having contact with his children. But the man violated that injunction more than once. He called his relatives, who gave him the opportunity to talk on the phone with his children. In total, he made more than 100 phone calls and talked to his children for more than 9 hours. According to prosecutors, during some of the calls, Larry made disparaging comments about Maya's family or asked for news headlines to be read to him. He asked an 11-year-old girl to have her and her 10-year-old sister watch a movie called Shot Caller, an R-rated movie that contains a warning, said Deputy District Attorney Christy Bowles. Essentially, it's a story about a businessman who goes to jail. Larry suggested that children watch it to see what kind of environment he was in. As a result of the court, Larry was stripped of all phone calls except for calling his attorney. However, as early as October 2022, Larry was granted permission to communicate with his children in writing. He was still prohibited from speaking with them through personal visits and the telephone. In order for the children to continue attending their current schools in Chula Vista, they were awarded custody to their paternal grandparents on October 19, 2021. Maya's sister also wanted custody of her nephews, but was denied. Maya's family was allowed to visit the children, but they still wanted to seek full custody of them through the court. The judge ordered Larry Millett's parents to facilitate maternal visitation with the family and work to obtain mental health services for the minors. When visiting the children, relatives are prohibited from discussing any details about ongoing criminal or probate cases with the children. Fairness. The children were left in the care of the parents of their mother's alleged killer, in a town where everything reminds them of the tragedy. Maybe the court should have sided with Maya's sister after all, giving custody to her. In June 2022, Larry's lawyer filed an appeal claiming the man was incompetent to stand trial, but after a psychiatric evaluation, Larry Millett was found competent. It is unlikely that an insane man could have been aware of his actions in cleaning up his tracks. When examining Larry's seized cell phone, it was found that all the text messages he wrote to his wife had been deleted. When asked where the correspondence had gone, Larry explained that he simply wanted to free up space on his phone. That's a strange answer, because the messages don't take up that much space on the device. During the trial, it turned out that Larry had withdrawn a large amount of money from his bank account. Perhaps with the money in hand, Larry was making plans to escape, or maybe he just wanted to move to another city, starting a new life with his children. Charged with murdering his wife and illegal possession of weapons, Larry Millett's trial is scheduled to take place in 2024. However, the trial has already been postponed and moved to other dates more than once. Could it be a matter of so-called circumstantial evidence? After all, circumstantial evidence is evidence that relies on an inference that connects it to a fact. For example, fingerprints at a crime scene. Direct evidence in turn supports the truth of a statement directly, that is, without the need for any additional evidence or inference. It is easy to get confused without the necessary legal skills and experience. In any case, the situation is unfolding before our eyes, picking up its pace. One thing is constant and tragic. The once prosperous, at least in appearance, family is destroyed. The mother has disappeared and is apparently dead. The father is in prison and apparently the perpetrator of the atrocity. The 3 children are left without parental love. 3 innocent souls, traumatized for life, left to live in a society that will remind them of what happened many times over, whether in reproach or out of pity, grieving the wound. Today we are going to visit India. India is the only country in the world where cultural and religious traditions have not been interrupted since ancient times, which is probably why it attracts tourists from all over the planet. But in our story, we will look at India like a coin that has a different image on each side. On April 20th, 2018, at dawn, two young men went fishing down the river toward a mangrove forest. They took a long boat ride downstream until they reached a remote and quiet place. One of them jumped into the water to tie up the boat, but his attention was distracted by a pungent, acrid odor that was very close by. They went ashore and followed the odor. Curiosity led them to a horrifying find. There was something that looked like a human body hanging on a tree branch, and a skull lying nearby. The guys abandoned the boat and rushed to the nearest village to report the terrible find. A team of investigators, forensic experts, and police officers urgently arrived on the spot. The experts confirmed that the suspended body was indeed human. It was obvious that it had been hanging for a long time and had already begun to decompose. The flesh on the arms and legs had torn off. The skull was found nearby. Next to the body were packs of cigarettes, packaged drinking water, and a lighter, which probably belonged to the victim. An investigation was conducted at the scene the same morning. The evidence found was seized, and the remains were sent for examination. The modest remnants of clothing that could be identified on the victim were identified. Liga Scroman, a 33-year-old hiker, was the victim of an accident. But who is Liga Scroman, and what happened to her on the riverbank? Liga Scroman was born in Latvia in 1986. She grew up in a large and friendly family, had an older brother and a younger sister. The sisters were very friendly, and from childhood shared all joys and hardships with each other. Growing up, Liga moved to Ireland, but always maintained close relations with her family. It was in Ireland that she met Andrew Jordan. It was not love at first sight, as the modest Liga had difficulty in communicating with new people. But after 5 years, Liga and Andrew turned into a married couple who made great plans for the future. And despite the fact that Liga worked in a hotel and led a modest lifestyle, she dreamed of opening her own center of yogic retreats in Portugal. Andrew supported his beloved's idea, and together they saved money for 4 years to fulfill their dream. But fate had other plans. In early 2018, Liga was experiencing the effects of an aggravated skin disease that was causing physical and mental discomfort. To help her sister overcome this ailment and restore her emotional state, her sister Ilza invited Liga on a trip. So in February 2018, Liga and Ilza traveled to Trivandrum, the capital of Kerala, so that Liga could receive Ayurvedic treatment for depression. Kovalam is the premier Ayurvedic resort of Kerala in India. Kovalam, which means grove of coconut palms in Hindi, is a small village offering everything you need for a comfortable and complete rest and treatment. Ayurveda is the oldest system of medical knowledge, which originated more than 5,000 years ago. Ayurveda is based on the universal laws of nature, on the unity of all things in this world. Ayurvedic programs help a person to restore balance and harmony in the body. Panchakarma is the best Ayurvedic program for modern man in Kerala. Panchakarma helps to reboot the body effectively. Most of those who have undergone the Panchakarma course in Kerala repeat it annually, and it is not without reason, as regular Panchakarma not only allows us to get rid of extra pounds, but also adds a couple of decades of healthy life. Since 1985, Ayurveda has been recognized by the World Health Organization as the most effective system of alternative medicine in the world. Let us emphasize that all the promised benefits of Ayurveda are only an alternative, not a panacea for healthy longevity. The 33-year-old Liga and her sister came to Kerala in search of spiritual enlightenment, hoping to be cured of depression in one of the Ayurveda centers. Their treatment tour was scheduled for 6 weeks and included yoga classes, meditation, therapeutic herbal drinks, and nutritional and massage recommendations. The sisters were treated together at an Ayurvedic clinic at Kovalam in Kerala and have already completed their course. On the morning of March 14th, Liga refused to go to yoga class with her sister, explaining that she had a headache. When Ilse returned to her room, Liga was not there. With the help of the hotel staff, Ilse was able to find out that her sister left the hotel around 11:30 a.m. wearing leggings and a yoga t-shirt, hired an auto rickshaw, and went to Kovalam Beach for a walk. The beaches around Kovalam are popular destinations for both domestic and international travelers. The sandy beaches of Kovalam are always crowded. However, Liga could not be found there. Ilse wandered the beach until late at night showing her sister's picture, but never heard the long-awaited response that someone had seen her. This was actually strange, as Liga was a tall white girl who definitely stood out, and if she was actually on the beach, someone should have seen her. After searching unsuccessfully, Ilse went to the police station to report her sister missing. However, the Indian police officers did not show any sympathy for the missing foreign tourist, but on the contrary, complacently asserted that they would surely find the girl who had strayed, or she would surely return the next day. They were not even deterred by the fact that Liga, according to her sister, had psychological problems and could be an easy target for criminals. The Potencad police registered a case, but the investigation started coldly, or rather it is more correct to say did not start at all. Ilse Skromani had traveled extensively in Kerala. She had been to Kollam, Varkala, and finally came to Kovalam. She considered herself a very experienced traveler in India, and this time she took her sister with her to show her the India she loved so much. But the trip turned tragic. After a few days of inaction by the Indian police, Ilse started searching on her own. She enlisted the help of friends and also reported Liga missing to her husband. Andrew flew urgently to India. The police investigation intensified after the missing person's husband. Andrew, Jordan, and Ilse contacted the local press and started an online campaign to find her. Ilse also reached out via Twitter to India's Foreign Minister, Sushma Swaraj. "Please help! My sister, a Latvian citizen, has been missing for 8 days. We are very worried," she wrote. The desperate sister announced a reward of 100,000 rupees to anyone who could help find Liga or provide any information about her movements that day. Ilse and her friend Alexa, who had also traveled to India after hearing about Liga's disappearance, put up posters in the Kovalam beach area where Liga was last seen. Together, they put up flyers and distributed them to people. Numerous locals took an active part in the search for the missing tourist. The important fact remained that Liga suffered from depression and had a hard time interacting with strangers. On the day of her disappearance, she hired an auto rickshaw to reach the beach and was never seen again. She had about 1,000 rupees with her but no passport, so she could not leave the country. Ashok Kumar, head of the local police station, said that the police had no leads in the case. The police kept saying that the tourist had gone on a bender or eloped and would soon return on her own. However, regular, persistent requests for help from Ilse and Andrew forced the police to search for Liga. The search operation was conducted in the Kovalam beach area where Liga Skromani was last seen. Police assumed that she had drowned, just as the unidentified body of a woman was found washed ashore at Kula Chal in Kanyakumari district. Investigators examined the body along with the missing woman's sister, but the latter did not identify it as her sister. The version of drowning was not confirmed, and the search for Liga continued. Andrew, on the other hand, was convinced that his wife had been kidnapped by local gangs for the purpose of selling her. He tried to infiltrate these gangs to get more information, but was exposed and warned that repeated contact with the gangs would result in him having to leave the country. A month after Liga went missing, there are still no leads to help find the girl. Ilse continued to look for her sister. She visited Kovalam beach every day and watched people. On one such day, she spotted a boat and she had a theory. The only way to leave the beach unnoticed was the boat. On April 17, 2018, after a forced hiatus, Andrew returned to India to continue his search. Ilse and Andrew entered a new struggle to find the Skromane League, but the body was still not found. The search was complicated by the fact that Liga Skroman was a tourist and a citizen of another country. The Latvian Foreign Ministry said the embassy was in constant contact with Liga's relatives and was also working closely with the Indian police. The Latvian embassy also appealed to the Indian Foreign Ministry with a request for special support in the search for Liga, as well as the honorary consul of Latvia in India, whose consular district includes the region where Liga disappeared. At the request of the Kerala state government, the Indian Navy and Air Force will search for missing Latvian citizen Liga Skraman. The search operation involved an M-32 transport plane, Gemini inflatable boat, underwater sonar, and 5 deep-sea divers. But even this search operation did not bring the desired result, and Liga was still not found. The search continued. By this time, all local residents knew about the missing tourist from Latvia. They supported and sympathized with Andrew and Ilza. On April 20th, 2018, Ilza's phone received the longest-awaited yet most horrific call of her life. A body had been found in the mangrove jungle. She and Andrew drove to the designated spot where the police were waiting for them for the boat crossing. Ilza's heart was pounding like never before. She felt that for the moment, she would have to swim the path that the League had traveled to its demise. On the spot, horror overwhelmed her. Ilza saw her sister's clothes. The shirt and leggings on the body were recognized by Ilza, but the jacket and shoes did not belong to Liga. It remained unclear how, with whom, and why Liga had gotten to a place that could only be accessed by going through Panatura from Samudra Beach. 2 women confirmed that they had witnessed Liga traveling alone into the mangrove forest. But why would a girl who is being treated for depression and is already alone take a boat to a remote place in the forest? The body was shifted to the Medical College Hospital where it underwent an autopsy, which was captured on video camera. The police said they could not confirm the identity of the body until DNA analysis was completed. According to the city police commissioner, the body was badly mutilated, with a head lying nearby. Police have tentatively identified the dead woman as missing tourist Liga Skraman. In favor of the investigators' conclusions is also the fact that the victim was identified by Liga's relatives by her hair and clothes. One of the versions of rescue services in India was poisoning. There are poisonous pong trees in the mangrove forest, and she could have accidentally or intentionally eaten their fruit and poisoned herself. Between 1989 and 1999, more than 500 people died from poisoning by its fruits in Kerala alone. It looked like another nonsense, because the person was hanging upside down, but there was no head. It is obvious that if Liga was poisoned, her body would have been in a completely different position, and the head would have been in place. The Indian authorities were talking utter nonsense. Based on the information about Liga's complex psychological problem, the investigators also assumed the version that Liga had voluntarily left her life. Ilza feared that the police would try to pass off her sister's murder as a voluntary departure from life. Although a rope had been found at the scene, and it could be concluded that the hiker had hanged herself, Ilza demanded a separate explanation for the missing head. "Don't tell me it's lost," Ilza said sarcastically in yet another appeal on the internet. Breathlessly, Ilza and the anxious public waited for the results of the forensic tests. The forensic results were overwhelming. The forensic report stated that there were areas of blood pooling in part of Liga Skraman's brain, as well as bruising in the neck area. The autopsy revealed that the woman had been strangled by several people. She was killed in an attempted violent attack. There were external injuries on the body, probably sustained during the struggle. The fact of violence could not be confirmed as the body was in the decomposition stage. There were characteristic injuries on the cartilage in her throat, which indicated that someone had squeezed her throat with force. The trauma was severe enough to be fatal. According to forensic experts, there were blood clots in her brain which confirmed strangulation. They also noted that there were bruises on her neck and legs. A total of 9 wounds were recorded on Liga Skramani's body. In view of the above, the police no longer considered the version of voluntary death. According to the autopsy, it was determined that Liga was murdered. Liga died after resisting or struggling. Ilse breathed a sigh of relief and hoped that the police would soon find her sister's killers. But there were complications as well. As part of the investigation, the police began checking out local drug dealers and card players. In addition, during interviews with local residents, 2 women said that they saw Liga walking alone to the place where her body was later found, but the police said they did not fully trust their words. Meanwhile, Liga's relatives have accused Indian police of incompetence, claiming that if the girl had been searched for immediately, the tragedy could have been avoided. The 33-year-old Latvian tourist is believed to have been grabbed from a nearby beach and transported by boat before being strangled. A special team of investigators has begun looking for those responsible for the crime. About 40 suspects were interviewed. However, arrests were planned to be made a few days later after the law enforcers had enough evidence. The Indian police conducted an investigation that led to the arrest of 2 men who were eventually accused of killing Liga Scrimana. Police revealed that Liga Scrimana was lured by 2 men who then abused her before dismembering her body. The alleged assailants, who are now in custody, are local dealers in illegal substances. The suspects fully confessed under torture. Both the accused were pimps and were also dealing in illegal substances. Police said the autopsy did not reveal much evidence because League's body was badly decomposed. Andrew Jordan filed a petition in Superior Court calling for a review of the felony murder case. He believed that more people were involved in the woman's murder. In the petition, he pointed out that both defendants later recanted their pleas of guilty to the crime. According to Jordan, the men may have confessed because they were tortured, which, as it turns out, is a common practice in India. However, the Supreme Court of India denied the murdered woman's common-law husband, Liga Scrimana, a review of the case. Due to lack of direct evidence, the trial was postponed for 2 months. But Andrew was outraged by this attitude of the authorities. He had earlier accused the Kerala authorities and police of incompetence and attempts to cover up Leia's murder so as not to scare away tourists. Both the suspects' lawyers asked for and got a postponement. By law, they have the right to postpone the case once without giving any reason. The more they postponed, the more he was convinced the case was unclean. However, both suspects were in custody. Investigation revealed that 32-year-old Umesh and 28-year-old Udayakumar offered Liga Scrimana weed, and when she was drugged, they used it and then strangled and decapitated her. It is noted that the 2 men apprehended for the murder of Liga Scrimana and had previously committed similar crimes on numerous occasions. Both of them worked for a food delivery company in the Kerala capital and earned money as illegal tour guides in their spare time. Umesh and Udayan had been charged with destruction of evidence, murder, poisoning, kidnapping, and rape. The place where Liga's corpse was found and had earlier served as a pleasure ground for Umesh. He used to take men there. 13 criminal cases have been filed against him, including 6 for sexual assault and 1 for attempted murder. Several of Umesh's victims have testified against him. Liga Scrimana, along with both men, were seen in the area by several people. They were initially silent, but confessed to everything after the body was found. The detainees confessed to police that they'd committed the murder while attempting violence. They were apprehended, but had previously claimed that they had only seen Liga Scrimana in Kovalam. The men pleaded guilty after repeated interrogations. On December 6, 2022, the court finally sentenced both men to life in prison. The court also recognized that the criminals must pay compensation to Liga Scrimana's sister Ilse, 165,000 rupees each. We would like to note that there has been a whole series of such crimes in this country recently. Young girls are regularly subjected to violence. The problem of crime in India is very acute. Due to the huge number of sexual acts against minors, the government has introduced the death penalty. It is also worth noting that if the relatives, and primarily Liga's sister, had not been persistent, had they not involved the press by organizing a press conference and an influential MP, it is obvious that the local police would hardly have seriously investigated the case. For at first a theory was put forward that the League had allegedly passed away voluntarily, and as it now turns out, this is not the first incident in this very place where Liga was found. After this story, I would like to warn once again all women who are frivolous about the dangers of traveling alone in India. Do not seek spiritual enlightenment in distant, dangerous, and uncharted countries. Take care of yourself. The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father, the head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Etha, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch Labar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets a homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of internet phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abril Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abril Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaon. Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. Abril, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, Abril was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Perez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abril was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos. In the mid-1990s, as Abril's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998, the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Anna Cecilia. 30-year-old Abril was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, Abril gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abril was in love, and initially thought that over time they would rub along, and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son. But by the time the third child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. April kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Jerez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. April was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, April stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this promotion, the family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Jerez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change in scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, it changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow April and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, the woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied April, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, April, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Jerez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as April needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually April's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Jerez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, April decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. April was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, April arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, the woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport. but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old April, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. April's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Scheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and April, he would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Ana Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed 2 vehicles following the car from the courthouse, in which April, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that 2 suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle Abril would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on Abril with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting Abril. Almost 5 years after the woman's death, the main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided. A crime of honor committed by close relatives. A crime of honor is a severe criminal act, typically, but not necessarily, committed against a female family member as punishment for bringing disgrace and dishonor upon the family. The offenses punishable by death at the hands of relatives can vary across different countries and cultures, but often include marital infidelity and apostasy. Each year, according to official statistics, around 5,000 such crimes occur worldwide. However, various women's rights organizations claim this number is at least 4 times underreported. What is most alarming is that often, the perpetrators face no punishment, and their actions are deemed righteous. Police in countries where such crimes are prevalent simply turn a blind eye to these acts, and although it is claimed that in recent years the penalties for such actions have been intensified, there are no official data to substantiate this. Sami Shahid's case in 2016 shocked the world. She was forcibly married off to a cousin she openly despised and sent to her ancestral homeland. However, she soon broke off this imposed union to marry for love, against her relatives' wishes, and paid the ultimate price for it. Her story drew intense public scrutiny as she was a British citizen of Pakistani descent. Yet she met her tragic end in Pakistan, where the case was quickly suppressed, attempting to frame it as an unfortunate accident. The Shahid family story. Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid and Matiaz Shahid emigrated to the UK in the mid-1980s from a small Pakistani village named Pandori. Located in the Jhelum district of Punjab province, they moved to a foreign land in search of a better life to escape the poverty they lived in back home. In November 1987, their eldest daughter, Sami, was born in the English city of Bradford, located in West Yorkshire, and a few years later, her younger sister Mita was born. The head of the family established his own business renting cars, which later focused on renting luxury vehicles, including high-end limousines. As his business prospered, he helped two of his brothers and their families also move from Pakistan and settle in the UK. The relatives also opened and successfully developed their businesses. One brother had his own seafood shop chain by the early 2000s, and the other opened a flower delivery and floristry company. Overall, the Shahid family was quite well known and successful in Bradford, being quite wealthy and influential. Sisters Sami and Mita were born and raised in the UK, but their family strictly adhered to the laws and traditions of their ancestral country, so the girls grew up under the influence of a mix of European and Pakistani cultures and customs. The liberal English views and manners starkly contrasted with the strict orders of their ancestors' country. For example, the girls were not allowed to drive a car, and all their contacts and movements were strictly monitored by their father. The elder daughter, Sami, was the apple of Chaudhry Muhammad's eye and was considered daddy's girl. He indulged her in every way, buying her expensive outfits and jewelry, and paid for her education at one of the most prestigious universities. She meticulously cared for her appearance, used cosmetics from well-known brands, visited beauty salons, and spent extravagant amounts of money there. Meanwhile, she worked part-time at a post office, essentially supported by her father, who paid for all her whims and desires. Frequently, Sami, without her family knowing, would rent a car and drive herself. She loved driving, felt confident behind the wheel, and did not understand why Pakistani traditions forbade women from doing so. She was headstrong and freedom-loving, but she tried not to upset her parents, doing everything as they said. Shahid had many friends from school and university in England with whom she kept in touch. She was characterized as a bright, kind, and cheerful person. Forced marriage. Despite living a life filled with love and abundance and seemingly having everything she wanted, the woman was deprived of the opportunity to make any decisions independently. She constantly lived with an eye towards her parents' and elder family members' opinions, from whom she needed constant approval for her actions. More than anything, Sami feared upsetting her father, whom she adored. However, numerous prohibitions, fears, and strict orders meant she was never truly honest with her family. In 2012, her parents decided it was time for their eldest daughter to settle down, get married, start her own family, and have children. They insisted that she go to Pakistan and enter into a marriage in accordance with all the rules and cultural traditions. They chose her cousin, Chaudhry Muhammad Shakil, whom she barely knew, as her groom. It's worth noting that marriages between relatives and arranged marriages are quite common, although not a strict requirement in Sunni Islam, but the tradition is honored to this day. Sami knew that sooner or later her parents would choose a husband for her and present it as a fait accompli, leaving her with no choice in the matter. She was prepared for this, understanding the inevitability of such a marriage, but her father's choice was truly shocking to her. Shakil was openly distasteful to her, even causing her some repulsion. Additionally, he had recently been released from prison where he served time for ending someone's life over a land dispute. Since childhood, Sami occasionally interacted with Shakil as if he were a brother, but she could never imagine him as her spouse. Notably, her own parents were also cousins whose marriage was arranged by relatives, but they managed to genuinely fall in love and build a happy family. Her parents believed that their daughter would experience the same fate and that she and Chaudhry would eventually fall in love. Despite her aversion to the groom, Sami could not disobey her father and understood how important this was to her family. However, her mother and younger sister Mita later claimed that no one forced her into the marriage, and given her complex and headstrong character, it would have been impossible to do so physically or morally. She married voluntarily, without any coercion. In early February 2012, the decision about the upcoming wedding was finalized at a family council. The following couple of weeks, her parents and aunt and uncle, future in-laws, took the bride shopping, where she chose everything she liked, and they paid for expensive outfits, jewelry, accessories, cosmetics, and so on. Sami was denied nothing, but it all seemed as if she was being purchased. Likely that was indeed the case. The bride pretended to be caught up in the wedding preparations, but inwardly she felt like a hostage. She already understood that this marriage would not bring her happiness, but would be a real punishment. However, she could only discuss this with her friends, not her family. At home, she needed to appear happy, discuss the details of the upcoming celebration, and prepare for her departure to Pakistan. On February 20th, 2012, the young woman boarded a plane and while in the cabin, sent a message to a close friend saying she was flying thousands of miles to make the biggest mistake of her life, but she had no choice. Later, she sent several more messages in which she confessed that the mere sight of the groom made her nauseous, and she could not stand to be near him. On February 27th, a lavish wedding was held for Sami and Chaudhry in Pandori, attended by about 1,000 people. The celebration lasted 4 days, and as a wedding gift, her parents presented the newlyweds with their own luxurious 2-story house, located next to their family home in the same province of Pandori. However, the young woman understood that this rich and beautiful house would become a real prison for her, where she would be forced to live with a man she did not love. Return to the United Kingdom. Family life, predictably, did not bring Sami happiness. She still detested her now lawful husband and realized she could neither love this man nor even grow accustomed to him. But 4 months later, in mid-June 2012, the young woman returned to her native Bradford to sort out some issues and help her husband with the immigration documents for obtaining British citizenship. She was supposed to apply for a spousal visa for Shaquille, but she was in no hurry with this, enjoying the illusion of freedom and the opportunity to not see her unloved husband for some time. When Sami finally started processing the documents, she learned that their wedding ceremony, conducted according to all the canons of Sharia, was just a marriage contract between Muslims, but had no legal force in the United Kingdom. To recognize such a marriage, certain measures under European laws were necessary, namely conducting a civil ceremony and obtaining an official document, a marriage certificate. Friends of Sami noticed changes in her character and behavior after returning from Pakistan. The young woman appeared sad, her eyes seemed extinguished. She was no longer the joyful and sociable person she used to be, and she clearly harbored deep resentment towards her parents. Any conversations or mentions of her husband and family life provoked irritation and anger in her. The issue was that Shackle was very jealous and tormented his wife, even from another country. He constantly called her and could demand at any time that she video chat with him. This was how the man controlled where his wife was, what she was doing, and who was with her. Moreover, this was, in a way, a demonstration of the husband's superiority and his power over the woman. In early August of the same year, during a phone conversation with a close friend, Sami confessed that her nerves were giving out. She was completely drained and no longer wanted to live because she had lost any joy, hope for happiness, and a bright future. She said she detested Chaudhry with all her soul and never wanted to see him again. However, she could not say this to her relatives. They only went around telling everyone about the luxurious wedding they had arranged for their eldest daughter. The very man. In early September, without having resolved the issues with the spousal visa, Sami was forced to return to Pakistan to her unloved husband. She regularly wrote to friends about how miserable she was, how much she hated her marriage, and how she felt trapped with no way out. This continued for several months, but then she began to complain less frequently, and her mood changed. During her next visit to the United Kingdom, it became clear what had caused this change. It turned out that she had met a young man online, Syed Mukhtar Kazim, who, like her, was a British citizen of Pakistani origin. He was born and raised in London but had been working and living in the United Arab Emirates for the last few years. The pair started corresponding and quickly developed romantic feelings. They secretly arranged a meeting, and in October 2013, they saw each other in person for the first time. Sami immediately realized that Syed was the man of her dreams, with whom she wanted to spend the rest of her life. He was kind, caring, attentive, and courted her beautifully. They had a lot in common, but they both understood how dangerous and risky their relationship was. Nevertheless, life only seemed meaningful to the young people when they were together. She openly told her beloved about the situation she was in and said she was ready to end her marriage to start anew with Syed. However, she could not get a divorce through a British court because, according to local law, she was not married at all. Divorce and new marriage. In the spring of 2014, Shahid decided to speak with Shakil and asked him for a divorce, but he rudely refused, stating that she would belong to him until the end of her days. Then, during another visit to the United Kingdom to her parents, she secretly contacted a local Islamic Sharia council, reporting that she had been forced into marriage, which was a valid basis for annulling the marriage. She also converted from Sunni to the Shiite branch of Islam, which her new lover belonged to. The cleric contacted the woman's husband to hear his side regarding their marriage, but he again rudely refused to discuss his personal life, stating that he would not give permission for a divorce. After that, the Islamic Sharia Council of the United Kingdom dissolved the marriage, recognizing that Shahid had been coerced into it by family pressure. Sami's family members had no idea that she had divorced her husband in absentia and was preparing to remarry, now to the man she loved. In September 2014, the young woman secretly married her new chosen one. This time, the union had legal force, and the spouses received a certificate of registration of their relationship, confirming its legality. The same cleric who had granted permission to dissolve the bride's previous marriage conducted the Nikah religious ceremony. Only a few close friends of the newlyweds, who were present at their wedding, knew about this event. The couple was truly happy. Sami confessed to her friends that she felt like a princess in a fairy tale and couldn't believe that all this was happening in reality. However, this joyous and happy event was the beginning of a real nightmare: family dispute and escape from the country. When Shakil demanded that his wife return to Pakistan, she responded that she no longer belonged to him and presented a certificate of her new marriage. This infuriated the man, who immediately called his father-in-law to inform him of the situation, sparking a severe scandal. The family attempted to coerce her to return to her husband with threats, but she refused, which soon led to severe consequences. A few weeks later, Sami was brutally assaulted on the street while shopping with her sister. Notably, her sister was unharmed, but Sami nearly had her legs broken with metal bars. The police took her statement but failed to find the men responsible for the assault, and the case was quickly dismissed. At this time, Syed had to fly to Dubai for work, leaving his wife in the United Kingdom awaiting a visa to follow him. The wait became a real torment for her, filled with endless threats, disputes with relatives, and fear for her life. Moreover, her parents tried to prove that their daughter's divorce from Shakil was invalid, and even caused a scene with the cleric who had married the lovers. Sami's mother was furious, insulting her daughter and saying that she had disgraced their family and would suffer terrible retribution. In the spring of 2015, Sami finally received her visa and was able to fly to her husband in Dubai. It felt more like an escape, as the young woman feared her family would do everything possible to keep her and forcibly return her to Pakistan. For several months, she kept her passport with friends who also bought her a plane ticket and accompanied her to the airport, a new life. The following year was the happiest in Sami's life. She enjoyed her freedom and the ability to make her own decisions, living with the man she loved, who adored her and was ready to carry her on his hands. Additionally, she could drive a car, something her parents and former husband would never have allowed her to do. In photos posted on social media, Sami was radiantly happy. She blossomed, looked more beautiful, and it was clear she had achieved what she had always dreamed of. Shahid wanted to become a mother as soon as possible, but sadly, this happiness was not meant to be for her. Nonetheless, she and her husband confidently looked to the future, making plans for their lives, unaware that her closest relatives had already condemned her. Immediately after their daughter's departure, her parents filed a missing persons report with the police, which they later wanted to reclassify as an abduction, accusing Kazim of the crime. The Shahid family members started devising a plan to force the young woman to return by any means necessary, considering various options. Threats no longer worked on her, but they could play on her sympathy. A sinister trap. In June 2016, Sami's parents conveyed tragic news. Her aunt, Shakil's mother, had passed away. Sami was devastated and even considered flying to Pakistan for the funeral, but she was aware of the risks involved. Many family members still hadn't accepted that she had left her unloved husband and remarried. Her actions were viewed as betrayal and disgrace. A week after the aunt's funeral, her mother called again, reporting that her father's health had severely deteriorated. He had diabetes, and his condition had recently become unstable. If he passed away, Sami knew she would never forgive herself if she didn't visit him. Despite her concerns and her husband's attempts to dissuade her, she decided to travel to Pandori. Fearing for her life and safety, she promised her husband to keep in constant contact with him. On July 14, 2016, Shahid arrived in Pakistan and first went to a close friend's house. She left her passport and return ticket to Dubai with her friend, shared her fears, noted her bad premonition, and asked her friend to pray for her safe return to Syed. The following few days passed relatively peacefully. She stayed in touch with her husband and friend, updating them on her movements. She visited her aunt's grave with her family and met with many relatives. She was scheduled to fly back to Dubai on July 21st. However, on July 20th, Sami suddenly stopped making contact. Tragic news. On July 20th, 2016, Chaudhry Mohammed Shahid called the police station to report the tragic death of his daughter. When law enforcement arrived at the house where Sami had lived with her first husband, they found her lifeless body at the bottom of the stairs. Unfortunately, it was too late to help her. There were several visible bruises on her body, which, according to her parents, she sustained from falling down the stairs, and a small amount of pinkish foam was found coming out of her mouth. According to her father, Sami likely had a heart problem, fell, and rolled down the stairs. Since no one was home at the time, she was not assisted promptly, and she passed away. When asked about the whereabouts of the deceased's husband, Chaudhry stated that he had gone out on business. The police found no signs of foul play at the scene and did not open a criminal case, leaving the final determination to the forensic experts. An autopsy was conducted on the same day, yet the pathologist found no signs of violence, and the conclusion was that her death was due to natural causes. She was buried within a few hours of her death. Sami's sudden demise was not considered suspicious and raised no questions, except from her grieving husband. When Kazim was informed of his wife's sudden death from a heart attack, he couldn't believe it. Moreover, the press called the young woman's death a voluntary departure from life due to depression over her inability to have children. However, this version was contested by Shahid's relatives, who claimed she lost consciousness on the stairs and broke her neck while falling. Investigation and the grim truth. Syed Muhtar flew to Pandori on the first available flight and went straight to the police station to report that his wife was deprived of her life by her relatives and former husband. He described the forced marriage and her escape, as well as threats from her family. This information fundamentally changed the case. The authorities recognized it as an honor crime, but the body had already been buried, and the official report stated that Shahid died of natural causes. However, as the deceased was a British citizen, Kazim sought to involve European law enforcement and the media in the investigation. Initially, Sami's father agreed to an interview and tried to portray Syed Muhtar as an imposter and extortionist. However, after the young man produced their marriage certificate, as well as a hard-won copy of the medical report and post-mortem photos of the deceased, An investigation was initiated. The report noted bruises on the deceased's neck and legs and traces of male seminal fluid on her body, indicating that she had intimate relations shortly before her demise. But with whom, if Shaquille was supposedly not at home that day? Kazim held a press conference, presenting all the evidence he had, including text, voice, and video messages from Sami, in which she repeatedly expressed fear for her life. Suspicions arose that the police had been bribed, and the deceased's father and former husband were immediately detained. It turned out they had no intention of letting the young woman return to Dubai. They forcibly brought her to the house given as a wedding gift, where they searched all her belongings for the passport and ticket, which, as mentioned, she had left with a friend. A furious Shaquille, with his father-in-law's tacit approval, physically subdued the young woman, and after she tried to escape, the men caught up with her on the stairs. While the former husband strangled Sami with her scarf, the father held her legs, leaving her no chance of survival. This account was confessed at the station by the perpetrator himself, although Chaudhry Muhammad denied any involvement in the act against his own daughter. Legal proceedings and the fate of the participants. Besides the father and former husband, the deceased's uncle, who had acquired a forged report before the autopsy, and the commissioner who conducted the initial investigation, were also detained. In court, Shaquille recanted his confession, claiming it was made under duress. He spent just over 2 years behind bars but was released on bail in September 2018. In 2019, the man remarried and again attempted to relocate to the United Kingdom, which was unsuccessful. The father of the deceased was in prison from July to December 2016 and was also released on bail. He passed away in January 2018 at the age of 52 due to exacerbated health problems, never admitting guilt or involvement in his daughter's demise. The deceased's uncle and the commissioner were also released in the fall of 2016 without facing any consequences. Soon after, arrest warrants were issued in Pakistan for Mita and Matiaz Shahid, but the mother and sister of the deceased promptly returned to Bradford. Mita later gave a substantial interview in which she attempted to discredit Sami and her second husband, blaming them for the downfall of the once happy Shahid family. The angry man walked out of the house, slamming the door hard. He reached the driveway and stopped. He ran his hand through his black, disheveled hair several times. The man was visibly nervous and said something quietly under his breath, then walked briskly back toward the house. He tugged sharply on the doorknob and stepped inside. Picking up a baseball bat that was lying at the entrance, he walked bossily through the house and shouted violently. At his screams, a blonde-haired young woman ran out. As soon as she approached him, he struck her on the head with the bat. The woman fell unconscious, and instantly a pool of blood formed on the floor around her. The enraged, dark-haired man continued to strike the immobilized woman until his fervor subsided. It is hard to imagine, but it happens that in such a paradisiacal place of the planet as New Zealand can happen such bloody tragedies. After all, New Zealand is first of all a picturesque nature with its unique flora and fauna, which creates a comfortable climate for people to live in. People living here have a high standard of living with a measured and calm way of life, where there is no corruption and crime is close to zero. But today our story will disrupt the tranquil life of Oakland and completely change the notion of a happy family. Carmen and Brad met on an ordinary day, which later became a fateful day for the two of them. Carmen Thomas was born on October 30th, 1987 in South Africa. Her father died when the girl was only 10 years old. Heavily bearing the loss, her family moved to relatives in the town of Whitby in the United Kingdom. But in another country, the long-awaited peace never came, and after a while, her family moved back to South Africa. Carmen, who was over 18 years old at the time, decided to stay with her relatives and later moved to live in London. In London, Carmen completed her studies and earned a master's degree in marketing. She had a strong and mischievous personality that attracted people. Carmen was a loyal friend and comrade for many people, but a beautiful life in a large metropolis required a lot of expenses, and the girl had to work hard to ensure a decent standard of living. During the day, Carmen worked in the store as a marketer, and in her spare time she worked part-time in a gentleman's club. Despite her strange choice in the service industry, Carmen was a girl of strict rules and never allowed herself unnecessary and even more so undignified behavior, which was very much appreciated by important clients. It was there that she met an attractive and flamboyant man, Brad Callahan. Bradford James Joseph Callahan was born in New Zealand in April 1978. The boy's parents separated when he was 9 years old. Little Brad stayed with his mother, after which they moved to Australia. In 2001, Brad graduated from university and received an engineering degree in the construction industry. At the invitation of a large construction company, he moved to the UK, where he was offered a position as chief structural engineer for a large business complex. For important negotiations and added status, Brad turned to a gentleman's agency, and his choice fell on the beautiful Carmen. The man was intelligent, tall, black-haired, with bright dark eyes, but he could not afford a real relationship because of too much ambition and busy career. He had no free time for a permanent relationship. After a successful business dinner, Brad was conquered by the open and radiant Carmen. They continued informal communication, which was repeated again and again. After a while, they formed a good friendship, which later grew into love. The candy bouquet period flew by very quickly, and the lovers began to live together. Their life together was based on trust and care. They sincerely supported each other and looked absolutely happy. After a while, Carmen became pregnant, and Brad decided that the best solution for them would be to return to New Zealand, to a country with clean air and the measured course of life. They returned to Auckland. In March 2005, Carmen and Brad had their son Jack. Jack brought more joy and happiness into their lives. From the first days, Carmen and Brad took care of his safety and provided everything they needed for his happy childhood. To them, Jack was the most important thing in their lives. However, with the birth of their son, serious disagreements arose in their relationship. The first misunderstandings appeared because of the upbringing of the child. The relationship between the lovers became turbulent and unstable, and after 3 years they parted, but retained joint custody of the child. The breakup was difficult for both of them, but they sincerely tried to keep a good relationship for the sake of little Jack. Wanting support and wanting to be surrounded by family, Carmen and Jack moved in with Colin, Carmen's half-brother, who also lived in Oakland. Gradually, emotional balance returned to Carmen, and she began a new life without Brad. In 2008, Carmen moved with her young son to a house on a neighboring street to Brad's so that the son would be closer to his father. The young woman, who lost her father at an early age, sincerely wished that her child would always have a father around as much as she could. Despite this decision, many of Carmen's friends and family thought the couple still had a good friendship, but they only spent time together for Jack's interests. However, life went on. Carmen and Brad tried to find happiness separately again. Brad continued to work as a construction engineer, and in May 2009 he started a new relationship with a girl and even got engaged. Carmen was busy raising her son and resumed her services in the gentleman's club, which quite hurt Brad. He sincerely believed that the mother of his child should never again be interested in dubious earnings. This disagreement became a boiling point in their good relationship. With each passing day, the situation grew more heated. Carmen gave ultimatums to Brad, and he in turn simply ignored the requests of the former lover. Nevertheless, Brad entered into a new marriage and was preparing to become a father again. New financial obligations directly reflected on the alimony, which he paid under the agreement Carmen for the maintenance of Jack. The money was the last straw in a series of scandals. On March 19, 2010, neighbors called the police. The police officers arrived and responded to an incident of domestic violence. Carmen attacked Brad during another quarrel and received a warning. The relationship finally deteriorated. Arguments did not stop even at a distance. Each new question regarding Jack was perceived by each party in the bayonet and with aggression. Once loving parents for a long time could not agree on what school Jack should go to, and it again led to a number of unsolvable problems and a chain of scandals. On June 29, 2010, Brad again came to Carmen's house to make a new written agreement to pay child support and to discuss a new school for Jack. Carmen was not satisfied with the document, and she kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left. 2 weeks later, Brad tried to speak to Carmen again, but she did not make contact. On July 13, 2010, he reported Carmen Tarmas missing to the police. The police took the report and began searching for the missing woman from video camera images and interviews with neighbors. Reconstructing the chronology of events since the last communication between Carmen and Brad, investigators found out some important details that should help in the search for the woman. They managed to find out that on June 29th, a surveillance camera recorded Carmen at a supermarket near her home. While inspecting the rented house where Carmen lived with Jack, the lack of a garbage can on the outside caught the attention of police. Inside the house, there were also traces of blood on the front door, on the washing machine, near the sink and shower. Forensic scientists used luminol to detect traces of blood left at the crime scene because it reacts with the iron contained in blood hemoglobin. The multiple patterns that appeared confirmed the presence of blood on the bathroom door and on the floor. The landlady told investigators that on June 29th, she heard loud screaming followed by prolonged crying and moaning. Recalling that day, she said she knocked on Carmen's door, but no one answered. She had to look out the window. She saw a street trash can and an overturned fabric horse, which is a drying rack usually made of wood or metal for drying clothes. Startled, the landlady called her husband, but while she waited for him to arrive, Brad walked out of Carmen's house and into the driveway. He was carrying soiled clothes in his hands, and upon seeing the landlady, Brad rushed to explain that Carmen had become ill after a medical procedure and had vomited blood. However, the landlady noticed Brad's condition. He looked like he had just taken a shower. The woman had no reason to disbelieve the man's story and did not call the police. The search continued, and Carmen's cell phone caught the attention of the police. Messages were being sent from her phone on a regular basis, but the manner of communication and tone of the messages were different and did not resemble Carmen's previous manner of communication. The outgoing messages and calls continued until July 10th. Where did the woman go if she needed medical help, and why? The investigators did not have to look for answers to these questions for long. During further investigation, Carmen's car was found. In the back seat of the car was found luggage, clothes, and other belongings of the woman. The examination of the seized suitcase on some of the things were found traces of blood. A note was also found in the car indicating that Carmen owed money to the agency where she worked. In the glove compartment was an envelope with Misty's name on it and the sum of $270. Police Inspector Mark Benefield, after finding traces of blood in Carmen's car, first raised the possibility that the woman had been murdered. Police searched the countryside southeast of downtown Oakland for the body of Carmen Thomas after a new report that her car was spotted around the time she went missing, but the search was inconclusive. The investigation and search for the woman continued. When investigators examined Carmen's and Brad's phones at the same time, they discovered both phones had been nearby the entire time they were being searched, and Carmen's phone was not found connected to a cell tower in Hamilton. Going forward, one of the most important pieces of evidence was the missing trash can. It remained to be seen if it could be the same bin that had disappeared from its place near the house, and that a neighbor had seen through her window on the day Carmen disappeared. But what did the trash can need to be inside the house for? Police did not refute the idea of the worst possible outcome and rechecked Brad's cell phone and spending by examining his bank card details and traced his shopping list. On June 30th, Brad Callahan, a meat cleaver and a large plastic container, as well as several garbage bags. By scrutinizing Brad's daily routine, police identified some exceptional events that did not fit into the young father's daily to-do list. It turned out that on one workday, Brad arrived at the construction site very early and walked alone around the property for a long time. It was strange, but not so strange that the workers who saw him would start reporting anyone about such an early presence of a supervisor at the construction site. Based on the evidence gathered, such as Carmen's cell phone and questionable purchases, Brad went from victim to suspect. Police believed that Brad Callahan killed his former lover by hitting her several times in the head and carefully hiding the body. On September 21st, Brad Callahan was arrested on charges of murdering Carmen Thomas and attempting to change the course of justice. He pleaded not guilty and is scheduled to stand trial. In a fateful coincidence, Brad's second son from a new lover was born at the time of his incarceration, which caused a wave of emotion and resentment in the young father who was in custody. The man broke down, and 9 days after his arrest, he pointed out to investigators the burial place of Carmen Thomas. Brad thought he had come up with the perfect plan, part of which was to make it appear that Carmen had gone to Hamilton and never returned. He was absolutely certain he had succeeded, but life made adjustments. Under questioning, he detailed the chain of events from that fateful day. After a bad conversation, Carmen kicked Brad out of the house, yelling in the wake that Jack was not his son. Brad left, but 5 minutes later, he came back into the house and hit Carmen in the head with a baseball bat with such force that she immediately fell unconscious. Blood spurted from her wound, staining the floor a bright red. Heavy breathing filled the room, and Brad stood over the body of his victim with a wild scowl in his eyes. He realized he had just done the irreparable, but he couldn't stop. In a fit of anger and resentment at Carmen's words, he threw several punches again. He knew that his act carried irreparable consequences, but everything remained in the shadow of his insane obsession. Memories flashed before Brad's eyes, happy and endless memories that were now gone forever. Brad knew that his life would be forever changed after that disastrous moment, and that he would not be able to get back everything that was, but it did not upset him at all, because by such an act he had solved his main problem, and Jack was now only his. Having come to his senses, Brad took a shower and then quietly left Carmen's house. In the days that followed, he sprang into action to get rid of Carmen's body and cover up the crime. Callahan called his friend and arranged to meet him outside the supermarket. He asked him to buy 3 black garbage bags, a bottle of kerosene and cleaning products, and waited for him outside the store, hoping to avoid suspicion. Brad then went back into the apartment and cleaned it up. He carefully wiped up the blood spatter and then wrapped the body in a bag and took it out in a trash can. In the following days, the defendant dismembered Carmen's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. He cut Carmen's legs from her torso at the hip joints. Each leg was cut through the knee into 2 pieces. Her arms and head were also severed from her torso. On July 3rd, he met a good friend at a boat ramp in Oahu Bay, near downtown Oakland. He told him that he had killed Carmen during an argument and needed help disposing of the body, but an attempt to dump the remains into the sea failed due to the friend's refusal to provide a boat. Over the next few days, he drove to Waitakere Ridge in West Auckland and buried the containers in a shallow grave. On July 7th, he drove Carmen's car to Hamilton and abandoned it in a hotel parking lot. He put a suitcase of clothes and several other bags of her personal belongings in the car to give the impression that the woman wanted to leave. But in his haste, he overlooked the fact that the suitcase also contained bloody clothes. After getting rid of the car, Brad began sending text messages from her cell phone to give the impression that Carmen was still alive. The criminal texted her friends, saying she wasn't feeling well and had been in bad shape for days. But Brad's perfect plan backfired on him. On October 1st, police went to the burial site Brad had indicated and discovered the body. Harmon Thomas's remains were found in plastic containers. They were carefully removed from a makeshift grave on Waitakere Ridge. An autopsy determined that Carmen Thomas had died from multiple blows to the head, with the fatal blow causing a compressed skull fracture. After multiple forensic examinations, Carmen's body was released to her family for burial. On October 13th, a private funeral was held at Green Lane Christian Center for Carmen Thomas, a young mother, a cheerful, kind, and successful woman. Little Jack, who all along had waited and hoped to see and hug his mom, was only able to hug and kiss her white casket. On February 8, 2011, the first court hearing for Carmen Thomas took place. Judge Wenning found the crime committed was unintentional and took into account Brad's explanation that he acted on emotion. He acknowledged that it was done in a fit of rage, but Judge Wenning was less lenient when it came to the cover-up. On May 26, 2011, Brad Callahan was newly charged with attempting to change the course of justice. A summary of the police case shows that at 8:45 a.m. on July 29, 2010, Callahan struck Mrs. Thomas several times in the head, resulting in her death. He then texted a friend to bring 3 garbage bags and a bottle of kerosene. During the ensuing period, Callahan dismembered Miss Thomas's body into 8 pieces to prepare it for disposal. On November 25, 2011, a retrial was held. Police officers who had been working on the case filled the High Court in Oakland when Bradford Callahan unexpectedly made 2 guilty pleas. Brad Callahan, who had previously denied guilt, suddenly admitted to murder and attempting to change the course of justice after Carmen's death. The judge said it was one of the most serious cases of attempting to pervert the course of justice, calling Brad's actions just about the most serious case of attempted perversion of justice there can be. The judge also felt the murder of Carmen Thomas was brutal, but not so brutal as to result in the harshest sentencing laws. The 33-year-old man was sentenced in Auckland High Court, where a large public gallery was filled with Thomas's friends and family, including her parents, who were visiting from South Africa. Judge Wenning sentenced Brad Callahan to life imprisonment for murder and 6 years in prison for attempting to pervert the course of justice. He also condemned the lengths Callahan went to in order to cover his tracks. The sentences are to be served concurrently. Judge Wenning also said the minimum sentence for the perverting the course of justice charge was insufficient to bring Brad Callahan to justice. Mr. Callahan passed judgment on himself by his actions that day, and it had a devastating effect on 2 families, said Detective Inspector Mark Benefield. Callahan's supporters left court without comment. In a statement, the Thomas family said nothing can bring their Carmen back, and they are still angry because of it. But they are grateful that Brad will be away for an extended period of time so he can reflect on the enormous damage he caused to their own son in the first place. Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott, told the court in a victim impact statement that she felt completely destroyed by what happened to her daughter. After the verdict was announced, the officer in charge of the investigation, Detective Inspector Mark Benefield, told the court that the justice done is the result of hundreds of hours of police work over the past 10 weeks since Carmen Thomas was reported missing on July 13, 2010. Also, Detective Mark Benefield, during the interview, explained what the work to find Carmen consisted of. He explained that early on in the missing person investigation, they determined that Carmen was most likely murdered. Then the work of gathering evidence, as well as researching information, was carefully conducted. This required a great deal of time and effort to gather, and it was also necessary that proper legal procedures were followed. The detective reported that over the last few weeks, close cooperation with the defendant's employer had not been finalized. Attempts to further investigate part of the Victoria Street construction site would continue in order to find any evidence that might assist the investigation. Until today, We have been unable to comment on media reports about our activities at the facility because we have been very sensitive to the issues of litigation and preemptive contempt of court," said Mark Benefield. He did not rule out the possibility of further arrests and charges in connection with Carmen's death in the near future. Brad Callahan had the courage to take responsibility for his actions in this tragic saga, and he pleaded guilty to 2 charges. But that will in no way change what he did. For the hearts of Carmen's loved ones are broken, their world shattered. Living each new day without Carmen, each of her close family members feels completely destroyed. "We will never forgive him for what he did to our family," said Carmen Thomas's mother, Teresa Scott. "I could forgive someone for taking a life under certain circumstances, but I can never forgive this man for being able to strip a body and hide it in containers," added her stepfather, Wayne. Callahan's attorney, Stuart Grieve, said his client acted responsibly and does not intend to file a motion. Can a sentence with parole eligibility after 13 years and 8 months be called a ridiculous miscarriage of justice? Obviously, since New Zealand only records about 50 murders a year for the entire country, any crime that is a little out of the ordinary is covered extensively by the national media, as are the court cases for those crimes. It's possible that there was an overbearing bias against the victim at trial because of her line of work. But even if Carmen was antagonistic and pissed Brad off, we don't blame the victim for having her life taken from her, do we? If Brad had wanted sole custody of his son, he likely would have used this prejudice about Carmen's work and gotten his way because he had the opportunity. Instead, he beat her to death and tried to cover it up. In this situation, we are not diagnosing. We are only speculating. In summarizing this gruesome story, the same question comes up repeatedly. It is understandable that in a fit of rage and uncontrollable anger, a person can commit irreparable acts. But what feelings can a healthy person have when he comes up with a plan to dismember a once tenderly loved person? Little Jack Callahan is currently living in another town under an assumed name in the temporary care of his grandmother. He doesn't know that his daddy took his mom's life and must never find out because it wasn't his fault. Absurd. No matter what the past experience was, new relationships are a clean slate. They offer fresh emotions and stir excitement. One has every chance to succeed where they might have failed in a previous union. However, emerging infatuation not only carries romance but sometimes also big problems. When choosing a life partner, you surely do not know what baggage they carry behind them. It happens that along with newfound feelings, you inadvertently take on burdens that should have been avoided. An example of this can be the so-called love triangle, known for its sharply defined angles. Horrific discovery. On October 5th, 2017, on the waterfront of the suburb of Fort Lauderdale, Florida, USA, law enforcement officers discovered the body of a man. The found body was wrapped in a tarpaulin, strapped with belts on both sides. This grim discovery was located at the bottom of a trash container of a local supermarket. During the autopsy, it was determined that the victim had received multiple blunt force hits and knife wounds. Apparently, the man had been beaten over a long period. During the assault, the unfortunate man had his jaw broken and teeth knocked out, some of which ended up in his respiratory tract. Most of the bones in the face and head were broken. Only on the skull were 6 wounds inflicted by a blunt object noted. Additionally, 6 knife wounds were found on the neck, 7 in the throat area, and several more in the upper part of the chest. The injuries were so severe that in some places the flesh was cut through. Ultimately, the medical examiners concluded that death was due to head trauma, blood loss, and suffocation. The identity of the deceased was beyond doubt, further confirmed by the victim's brother. On the pathologist's table lay 39-year-old Nicholas Wilcox from Putnam, Connecticut. What events led this young man to such a tragic end, and whether his tormentors were punished, we will learn in today's criminal story. Introduction to the main characters. In the subsequent investigation of Nick's demise, several individuals were suspected. His girlfriend, Isabella Tagliarini, and her former boyfriend, Eric Robinson. Both were also his neighbors in the duplex where our story's protagonist had moved. The house is designed for 2 families, and features separate rooms, each with its own yard and entrance, a popular type of property in Florida. Initially, Robinson, who had first rented the place, sublet the vacant units. 38-year-old Isabella was the first person he invited over. She was from Brazil, where she worked as a flight attendant for a national airline. In 2010, Tagliarini divorced and immigrated to the U.S. with her children. She successfully married an American, which helped her secure the coveted green card. The marriage lasted until 2016, but over time, their passionate feelings faded, leading to their separation. That same year, the young woman began dating 46-year-old Eric Robinson. Her new partner was from a small town in Massachusetts, had never been married, and had no children. A romantic relationship quickly developed between them, though it was periodically turbulent. The passionate nature of Isabella and Eric's accustomed bachelor lifestyle contributed to this. Moreover, according to the woman, he was inconsistent in showing his feelings. He could be cheerful and friendly, then suddenly become gloomy and aggressive. For this reason, the couple broke up and got back together multiple times. In June 2017, shortly before Nicholas moved in, the lovers had separated again. Wilcox had known the couple for about 6 months and maintained contact with them. When he mentioned wanting to save on rent, Robinson offered him to move in and share the expenses. Initially, the neighbors had a wonderful relationship. They respected each other's personal space, yet often spent time together. However, over time, this neighborly idyll was disrupted and problems began. As it turned out, Robinson was using and storing banned substances, which explained his erratic behavior and mood swings. On August 23, 2017, the man was detained. Shortly before this, he had reconciled with Isabella and was actually in a relationship with her at the time of his arrest. By then, Nicholas had already been living with them under the same roof. After Eric's detention, none of the tenants knew when the main renter would return, nor what their future held. It was possible they could be evicted at any time. Therefore, they immersed themselves in work to have a financial safety net in case of emergency. Fortunately for Nick, there was plenty of work, which was not the case for Isabella. The woman struggled to find suitable employment, so she began helping her neighbor in the construction business. The life story of Nicholas. It's worth noting that several generations of the Wilcox family engaged in similar activities. Nicholas's grandfather was a fisherman and built boats, and his father also dedicated his life to construction. Later, the main character joined the family business, becoming a roofer after graduating from school in 1996. Along with his older brother Donald, they acted as contractors, building their own client base. At the age of 23, Nick started a family. The young man tied his life to a girl named Kathy, who was his classmate in his senior year. A year later, the couple had a daughter, and 3 years after that, twins. Throughout this time, the family head worked diligently, striving to provide a decent living for his loved ones. Friends and acquaintances of Nick recalled that despite his busy schedule, he was a devoted husband and father. Yet he devoted a lot of time to his professional pursuits. Perhaps this was the reason for the family's eventual dissolution. The divorce occurred shortly after the birth of the younger children. Nonetheless, the father continued to communicate and support his family. A fresh start. At the beginning of 2017, following his brother, Nicholas moved to Florida. The new place promised better job opportunities. Here, the number of clients significantly increased. Additionally, the chosen method of earning became non-seasonal. Almost all year round, the state enjoyed good weather, warm and sunny, which creates excellent conditions not only for living, but also for business development. Moreover, the Wilcox profession came in handy in the new location, where powerful hurricanes regularly swept through the coastal areas. During storm season, homes were damaged and thus needed to be reinforced and repaired after the bad weather. Leaving his family back in Connecticut, Nicholas continued to care for his children from a distance. According to an agreement with his ex-wife, he sent them money and visited whenever possible. Initially, the man stayed in a multi-apartment complex in Fort Lauderdale. However, He later had to move to the suburbs to reduce his housing expenses. Irma. It was during this time that life brought him together with Isabella Tagliarini. The hurricane season had started, so Nick was inundated with daily orders. At that time, Hurricane Irma was approaching the area where the hero lived and worked. It turned into a powerful Atlantic tropical cyclone of Category 5, with wind speeds of about 177 miles per hour. An emergency was declared before its arrival. About 7 million people were evacuated from coastal areas. Nicholas spent all his time preparing buildings for the impending assault of the elements. He reinforced homes, boarded up windows and doors, and afterward was involved in clearing the resulting debris. Of course, all this was his main job, so he was paid for it, but he could not be called mercenary. In an interview, the man's older brother confessed that Nick never refused to help. One September day in 2017, as all of Florida was preparing for the terrible cyclone, Nicholas was busy boarding up windows with plywood. Soon there was a sharp shortage in stores, creating long lines. In one of these lines, a woman named Pamela approached Nick. She told him that she lacked building materials to fortify her home. In response, the younger Wilcox promised to solve this problem, and that same evening brought her the 7 missing sheets of plywood. He boarded up all the doors and windows of the woman's house and refused payment, even though he spent an entire day finding the necessary supplies. Nick was moved by Pamela's difficult life situation. She was left alone with children and needed outside help. In response, the woman thanked her rescuer. Heated romance. The hurricane brought widespread destruction, providing Nick with work for a long time. As a result, he decided to make his duplex neighbor his assistant. Isabella's duties included cleaning up after the projects were completed and handing tools during the work. As the young people spent a lot of time together, their friendly relations evolved into a romantic relationship. On September 3rd, the couple made a peculiar vow, written in blood and on paper, which served as a sort of engagement and a promise for a long and happy life filled with lots of children. Despite the strong feelings that enveloped the lovers, their union could not be called perfect. Almost immediately, minor issues and disagreements began. Arguments arose out of nowhere. On September 22nd, a serious conflict occurred between Nicholas and Isabella. The woman even left home and spent the night in a hotel. However, the next morning, the couple reconciled. According to Tagliarini, she lacked attention and respect from the man. He, on the other hand, thought she was exaggerating. Ultimately, their love led to inevitable consequences. The message. On October 5th, 2017, a man called the local police. During the conversation, he introduced himself as Isabella's former husband and asked the law enforcement officers to contact her. According to his words, she had information about a recent crime. The caller did not provide any more details. Despite the strangeness of the call, the police immediately responded to the message and called Tagliarini. From her voice, it was clear that the woman was hysterical. When asked by the police what had happened, she replied that everything was fine. The only thing that concerned her at that moment was a fight with her beloved man. She explained that he had left her and driven off in an unknown direction. However, when the police mentioned the call from her former husband, she immediately changed her tone. The woman began to cry and confessed that her beloved had not gone anywhere, but was dead. She also added that she knew where the body was located and was ready to show it. Crime scene. Law enforcement arrived at the address provided by Isabella. The officers were met with a house, all of whose windows and doors were boarded up with plywood, apparently in preparation for the approaching hurricane. Inside, there was a strong smell of cleaning agents and paint, indicating that the place had been thoroughly cleaned. In one of the bedrooms, detectives noticed the walls and floor had been hastily and sloppily painted, likely in an attempt to cover something up rather than for a routine renovation. Their suspicions were confirmed by the discovery of hydrogen peroxide containers. Small blood stains were found on the bedding and the bedside table. It was also evident that someone had replaced the old mattress. Despite efforts to eliminate and paint over them, Bloodstains were everywhere. The police suspected that the room had been the site of a violent crime, which Tagliarini had tried to clean up but hadn't completed in time, thanks to her ex-husband's timely call. Isabella was found inside the duplex, appearing distressed. During the conversation, she explained her state by saying she had been under the influence of a sedative during the phone call, which accounted for her unusual behavior. However, she confirmed knowing what had happened there and where the body was located. The unstable woman was decided to be taken to the station. By this time, the police had spoken again with her ex, who provided a partial account of the events. According to him, she had called him and told him about the crime. Initial version. Nevertheless, during the interrogation, the Brazilian woman claimed that Eric Robinson, her former boyfriend, was involved in the crime. On October 5th, around 2 a.m., the man came to the duplex and found the couple asleep. He was enraged by a vow hanging above the bed's headboard in the bedroom. He woke Isabella by putting a knife to her throat to prevent her from screaming. At that moment, she looked at Nick lying beside her, who seemed to be struggling to breathe. However, Eric did not allow her to see more and pushed her out of the bedroom. He then took a brass knuckle and a bat and began to beat the defenseless man. After finishing the beating, Robinson wrapped the body in a tarp and secured it with straps. Under the threat of a similar fate, his girlfriend helped him dispose of the body. However, the detectives were puzzled as to why, instead of calling the police, she had called her ex-husband. Isabella explained that she was very frightened and was looking for support and advice. According to her, the criminal also forced her to clean up the residence and eliminate all traces. Afterwards, he returned the phone he had taken earlier and left. Her confession raised doubts and required verification. Additionally, visible bruises and abrasions were noted on Tagliarini's body, which she explained were from being beaten by Eric after Nicholas's death. Investigation. The officers began their investigation by searching for the victim and his assailant. The suspect indicated where her boyfriend was hidden. While the medical examiners worked on the body, forensic specialists arrived at the scene. Meanwhile, law enforcement was busy searching for Eric. It was established that the man had been released from prison on October 3rd and was living at a different address. During this time, the criminal had met a new woman named Merida, at whose place he was staying. She told the police that on the night of October 5th, her boyfriend received a phone call after which he immediately left. He returned around 5 a.m., packed his things, and set off again without any explanation. When asked if she noticed any bloodstains on her boyfriend's clothes, Merida explained that she hadn't seen anything suspicious. Robinson was found around 8 p.m., 4 miles away from the house. He refused to cooperate with the investigation, and therefore, he was taken into custody pending further investigation. Eric's version. During the interrogation, Eric provided a story that differed from Isabella's version. According to his statement, Tagliarini contacted him on the night of October 5th, despite a restraining order she had received against him immediately after he was sent to prison. Despite this, she told him that she had attacked Nicholas under the influence of banned substances and ended his life. When Isabella came to her senses, she realized she couldn't manage the situation alone and asked for help. In return, the Brazilian woman promised Robinson that they would get back together and start over. As Eric still had strong feelings for her, he agreed to these terms. Fiery Brazilian. Detectives latched onto the man's words, wanting to interview the initial suspect once again. Given the circumstances and her behavior, it was clear that she was holding back information. Most likely, she was trying to minimize her role in the incident. Moreover, the investigation uncovered intriguing information. It turned out the woman was far from innocent and had been on the police radar multiple times. On September 22nd, when Nick and Isabella had a severe argument, it escalated beyond the confines of their room. Under the influence of Xanax and banned substances, she became enraged and destroyed some of her partner's belongings. Unfortunately, she also damaged his work vehicle. Consequently, the angered man felt compelled to contact the police. Moreover, she behaved so irrationally that he genuinely feared for his life. As known, The couple reconciled the following morning, and Nick withdrew his complaint. After this, investigators spoke with the suspect's ex-husband. He described Isabella as having an explosive personality and a fiery temperament. He also learned that during their argument, Wilcox had warned her. He threatened to contact immigration services if such incidents repeated. Nicholas informed her that he would give her a negative reference, which could impact her future significantly. For Tagliarini, the opportunity to live in the U.S. was paramount, so the fear of deportation was catastrophic. Could it be that during another argument, Isabella reacted explosively again and found herself under threat? It was quite plausible that her desire to stay in America could have motivated a subsequent crime. Not wanting to rely solely on existing statements, detectives began interviewing those close to the involved parties. An important witness turned out to be a neighbor of the young couple. Her windows overlooked the courtyard of the duplex. She stated that she saw Robinson arrive in his car on the night of the crime. He then took some tools and trash bags, and shortly thereafter, he got back in his car and left. The investigation continues. With substantial evidence gathered in the case, Tagliarini was called in for another interrogation on October 11th. At that time, the woman had not been arrested, so she came to the station voluntarily. Thanks to video surveillance footage, detectives established that on the fateful night, she personally transported Nick's body and disposed of it in a trash container. During this, the Brazilian was neither frightened nor agitated. She acted calmly and methodically, making decisions independently. That night, she indeed met with Eric Robinson, but she was relaxed and friendly. At the same time, no one took her mobile phone, and she purchased the items needed for emergency repairs herself. In response, she began to change her story, adding new details about the events. Isabella insisted that it was Eric who had threatened her with either murder or deportation along with her children. She claimed that she was forced to act as she did because of these threats. Although her statement sounded plausible, the investigators were cautious with their conclusions. Both Robinson and Tagliarini's backgrounds raised suspicions. Eric also had a turbulent past. He first caught police attention in 2001, mainly for possession and distribution of narcotics. At the same time, Isabella had every reason to fear him. In August 2016, he committed an aggravated assault against a woman. In June 2017, he was caught for strangulation, and in the same year, for possession of substances. Neighbors reported being afraid of the man and tried to avoid him due to his aggressive and erratic behavior. The next interrogation of the Brazilian woman took place on October 14th. Despite her claims of not having touched Nick, experts found traces of her DNA on the man's body, thus contradicting her statements. According to the investigation, she participated in the violent crime against her lover, at least in the disposal of the body and the elimination of evidence. However, neither suspect admitted to any wrongdoing. While Robinson was held in custody, Isabella was briefly detained before being released to await trial. Everyone was anticipating the start of the court proceedings. However, due to various complications and delays, the trial did not take place until 5 years later. The significant delay was caused by the outbreak of COVID-19 and a series of bureaucratic snags. During this time, the prosecution clearly formed its strategy and tactics, while the defense thoroughly reviewed all information gathered during the investigation. Additionally, during this period, another significant piece of evidence was uncovered. The prosecution managed to recover Robinson's deleted social media account, which he had used to discuss the crime against his former friend. Over these years, Isabella made a plea deal with the prosecution, admitting guilt to a lesser charge. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Eric. Sentencing. On April 10, 2023, the trial of Eric Robinson finally took place. The prosecution argued that he was solely responsible for the crime against Nicholas. Isabella's role was not presented as that of a co-conspirator, but as a witness who tampered with evidence and helped eliminate traces, which is also criminally punishable. Legal complexities caused several hearing cancellations, and the trial resumed after a week. Throughout the trial, Robinson was charged with premeditated murder, Despite Tagliarini providing inconsistent testimonies and contradicting herself, her attorney maintained her innocence. The prosecution focused on witness statements that described Eric's unusual actions on the night of the crime. To avoid GPS tracking, the accused used his new girlfriend's car, which was not equipped with satellite tracking, and he also left his mobile phone at home. Meanwhile, other case details were not concealed. It became known that after the crime, Isabella and Eric had an intimate encounter in the next room. She explained her condition by stating she was under the influence of strong sedatives and also feared for her life. After hearing both sides, it became clear that jealousy was the motive for the brutal and senseless murder of Wilcox. While Isabella claimed that she had ended the relationship, Eric still considered her his girlfriend. Upon his release, the accused returned home, but the changes that had occurred in the meantime fueled his rage and hatred. During this period, he plotted revenge against his rival and committed a cold-blooded attack while the couple was most vulnerable in their sleep. His first strike effectively sealed the fate of his former friend. He then attempted to dispose of the evidence by scattering it in various locations. The murder weapon was found in a landfill. The deceased man's body was wrapped in tarpaulin and hidden in a trash container. Afterwards, Isabella painted over blood-splattered walls and cleaned the area. Throughout these actions, Eric communicated with Isabella and directed her actions. Eventually, 51-year-old Robinson was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for second-degree murder. Isabella Tagliarini was found guilty of aiding the criminal, but threats and coercion were considered mitigating circumstances. She received a suspended sentence and is on probation until 2026. Remarkably, the convicted woman was indeed ready to do anything for U.S. citizenship. It was revealed that 10 days after Robinson was incarcerated, the parties signed another pledge. In it, Eric promised to marry Isabella, but he did not manage to do so. She was prepared to marry him shortly after he dealt with her lover. It appears that this unprincipled woman is indifferent about whom she marries. The main thing is to maintain her status. All men Isabella Tagliarini has been involved with were used for her selfish purposes and, in one way or another, were inclined toward marriage. Apparently, for her, nothing is more important than American citizenship, even if it comes at any price. To summarize this story, one might say, opportunity in life isn't singular, but life itself is. Unfortunately, some characters in this tale never realized this, while others did but much too late.